The crystal chandelier cast shadows across the marble floor as Lena Carter froze, mop in hand, hearing the CEO's desperate voice echo through the conference room. Without a Mandarin translator, this billion-dollar deal dies today. Her heart pounded 3 years of secret language study, hidden from everyone, and now fate was calling her name. One step forward could change everything. One step back would keep her invisible forever. Friends, this is a story about courage found in the most unexpected places. I invite you to follow Lena's journey to the very end, and please comment below which city you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this story travels. The morning sun hadn't yet touched the windows of Chicago's Skyline Suites Hotel when Lena Carter slipped through the employee entrance, her worn sneakers silent against the polished concrete of the service corridor. At 28, she had perfected the art of being unseen, a ghost, who cleaned rooms, changed linens, and disappeared before guests could register her presence. Her uniform, a crisp gray dress with the hotel's logo embroidered in gold thread, hung loosely on her slim frame, as if even the fabric conspired to make her blend into the shadows. "Morning, ghost girl," Marcus called out from behind the laundry cart, his voice carrying that familiar edge of mockery that had become the soundtrack of her workdays. He was one of the younger bellhops, all swagger and ambition, convinced that his proximity to the hotel's wealthy guests somehow elevated him above the cleaning staff. Lena didn't respond. She'd learned long ago that silence was her best defense, not out of weakness, but from a deep understanding that some battles weren't worth fighting. She pulled her cleaning cart from the supply closet, checking each compartment with methodical precision, fresh towels folded with military corners, bottles of cleaning solution lined up like soldiers, the small radio she kept hidden beneath the spare rags. "You know she won't answer." Destiny chimed in, emerging from the break room, with a coffee cup that read "World's Okayest Employee," a gift from last year's Secret Santa that she wore like a badge of honor. Destiny had started at the hotel 6 months after Lena, and while they weren't exactly friends, they'd developed a mutual understanding. Girl's probably mute or something. 3 years here, and I've heard her say maybe 10 words total. But Lena wasn't mute. Far from it. As she pushed her cart toward the service elevator, her mind was already switching languages, reviewing the Mandarin phrases she'd studied the night before. "Wo shuang ni de luxing yukuai." I hope you have a pleasant journey. "Qingrang wo jidao ni suyao shenmei." Please let me know what you need. The elevator doors closed, sealing her in blessed solitude, and she allowed herself a small smile. If only they knew. If only anyone knew about the textbooks hidden under her bed, the language apps that consumed her lunch breaks, the online tutors she paid with money she could barely spare. 3 years of dedication, all for a dream that wasn't even originally hers. Her mother's face flickered in her memory. Elizabeth Carter, who had spent 30 years cleaning office buildings while harboring dreams of seeing the world. China had been her obsession, sparked by a documentary she'd watched when Lena was 7. Elizabeth had bought Mandarin learning tapes from a garage sale, playing them every evening. While she cooked dinner, her pronunciation terrible, but her enthusiasm infectious. "One day, baby," she'd say, stirring a pot of spaghetti that would have to last them 3 days, "we're going to walk the Great Wall together. We're going to eat real dumplings in Beijing and see those warriors made of clay." But cancer had other plans. The diagnosis came swift and merciless when Lena was 22, and within 8 months, Elizabeth was gone. She'd left behind medical bills that could have bought a small house, a box of unused language tapes, and a daughter determined to honor at least one of her dreams. The elevator dinged softly, announcing the 14th floor. Lena wheeled her cart into the hallway, where morning light was just beginning to stream through the tall windows at the corridor's end. This was the executive floor, where rooms cost more per night than she made in 2 weeks. The carpet was thicker here, muffling every sound, and the air smelled of expensive cologne and fresh flowers. Room 1401 was first on her list, a suite that had been occupied by a tech executive who'd checked out at dawn. She knocked 3 times, waited, then used her master key. The suite sprawled before her like a small apartment living area, with leather furniture, kitchenette with marble countertops, bedroom with sheets that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe. The mess was typical of business travelers, papers scattered across the desk, empty wine bottles on the coffee table, towels dropped wherever convenience dictated. But as Lena began her routine, something caught her eye. A book left on the nightstand, The Art of War by Sun Tzu in the original Chinese. She picked it up carefully, her fingers tracing the characters on the cover. Without thinking, she began to read aloud, her voice soft but clear in the empty room. Zhi bi ji ji bai zhan bu dai. Know the enemy and know yourself, and you will never be defeated in 100 battles. Not bad pronunciation, but your tones need work. Lena spun around the book, nearly slipping from her hands. Standing in the doorway was Harold Washington, the hotel's night security guard, who should have gone home hours ago. At 67, Harold moved with the careful dignity of someone who'd learned that respect was earned, not given. His uniform was always perfectly pressed, his shoes polished to a military shine, and his eyes, those eyes, missed nothing. "Mr. Washington, Lena's voice came out as barely a whisper, her usual defense of silence shattered by being caught. "I was just reading Chinese philosophy while cleaning a hotel room." Harold stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a soft click. "That's not something you see every day. How long have you been studying?" Lena set the book down carefully, her hands trembling slightly. In 3 years, no one had discovered her secret. She'd been so careful, so quiet. "I don't know what you mean." Harold's laugh was warm, grandfatherly. "Child, I've been watching folks for longer than you've been alive. I see you during lunch breaks with those apps on your phone. I've heard you practicing in the supply closet when you think no one's around. And last month when those Chinese businessmen got lost trying to find the conference room, you understood every word they said. I saw it in your eyes." The weight of keeping her secret suddenly felt crushing. Lena sank onto the arm of the leather sofa, her professional composure cracking. 3 years, she admitted. "I've been studying for 3 years. Why hide it?" Harold moved closer, his expression genuinely curious. "That's a remarkable skill. The hotel would probably promote you to concierge or guest relations if they knew." "Because," Lena struggled to find the words. How could she explain that the studying wasn't about advancement or recognition? How could she tell him about the promise she'd whispered at her mother's hospital bed, or the way Mandarin characters felt like a connection to a woman who'd never gotten to live her dreams? "Because it's mine. It's the only thing that's really mine." Harold nodded slowly, understanding, flickering in his eyes. "I get that. Lord knows I get that. But Lena, gifts aren't meant to be buried. You know what I did before this?" He gestured to his security uniform. "I was a teacher, history, 25 years in Chicago public schools. But after my wife died, I couldn't stand in front of those kids and pretend everything made sense anymore. So I took this job. Nice and quiet, no one expecting anything from me except to walk the halls and check the doors." He paused, looking out the suite's window at the city waking up below. "But you know what hiding your light doesn't make the darkness any brighter. It just means everyone stumbles around a little more." Before Lena could respond, her radio crackled to life. "Housekeeping to room 1401. Lena, you there?" She grabbed the radio from her cart. "Yes, I'm here." Management wants all hands in the grand ballroom. Big international conference starting today. They need it spotless in 30 minutes. On my way, Lena replied, already moving to pack up her supplies. Harold headed for the door, but paused at the threshold. That book you were reading, Sun Tzu, knew something about revealing strength at the right moment. Don't wait too long to show yours, Lena. The world needs what you've got, even if you're not ready to believe it yet. After he left, Lena stood alone in the suite for a moment, looking at the book on the nightstand. She picked it up again, slipping it into her cart beneath the cleaning supplies. The guest had left it behind, and the hotel's policy was to hold lost items for 30 days before staff could claim them. She'd wait the 30 days. She was good at waiting. The grand ballroom was chaos when she arrived. The space, which could hold 500 people, was being transformed for the International Trade Summit, 3 days of meetings between American companies and potential partners from across Asia. Banners were being hung, translation booths, installed, tables arranged and rearranged as event coordinators barked orders into headsets. Finally, Claudia Winters materialized from behind a massive flower arrangement, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. As the hotel's director of operations, Claudia ruled her domain with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove if that velvet was soaked in acid. At 42, she was everything. Lena wasn't tall, imposing with platinum blonde hair pulled into a bun, so tight it seemed to stretch her already sharp features. I need this floor polished to a mirror shine. The CEO of Miles Industries will be here in 2 hours, and everything needs to be perfect. Miles Industries. Even Lena knew that name. Ethan Miles had taken over his father's struggling manufacturing company at 26 and transformed it into a billion-dollar enterprise in just 5 years. At 31, he was Chicago's golden boy, the subject of magazine covers and business school case studies. The conference was his baby, an attempt to expand into Asian markets with deals that could reshape the American manufacturing landscape. Yes, Ms. Winters, Lena murmured, already reaching for the industrial polisher. And for God's sake, Claudia continued, her voice dripping disdain, try to be invisible. These are important people. They don't need to see. She gestured vaguely at Lena, letting the implication hang in the air like a bad smell. The help. Lena nodded, swallowing the familiar sting of humiliation. She'd heard worse from Claudia, who seemed to take personal offense at anyone she deemed beneath her station, which was everyone except the hotel's owner and the wealthiest guests. As Claudia stalked away, Destiny appeared with her own cleaning supplies. Which? She muttered under her breath. You know, she was a maid herself 15 years ago. My cousin worked with her at the Marriott downtown. Soon as she got promoted, she forgot where she came from. But Lena wasn't listening. Her attention had been caught by a group of men entering the ballroom, Chinese delegates judging by their conversation. Without thinking, she found herself translating their rapid-fire Mandarin in her head. This place is impressive, but I'm not convinced Miles has what we need, one was saying. The Americans always promise big, but deliver small, another replied. We should be cautious. Mr. Zhang wants this deal, though. If we can get the exclusive distribution rights. They moved past without noticing her, just another invisible fixture in their important world. But Lena filed the information away, her mind automatically cataloging tones, regional accents, business terminology she'd only read in textbooks. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of polishing, dusting, and arranging. The ballroom slowly transformed from chaos to elegance, with round tables dressed in white linen centerpieces of exotic flowers and a stage set with flags from a dozen nations. Lena worked in her usual silence, but her ears were constantly tuned to the conversations around her: English, Mandarin, Cantonese, even some Korean and Japanese. The international business world was playing out before her, and she absorbed it all like a sponge. She was adjusting a tablecloth when she heard the commotion at the entrance. Ethan Miles had arrived, and the energy in the room shifted immediately. Even from across the ballroom, his presence was magnetic. He was younger than she'd expected from the photos, with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it, and a suit that probably cost more than her annual salary, but somehow looked casually worn. He moved through the room with confident ease, shaking hands, laughing at jokes, switching between English and what sounded like passable Mandarin. "Mr. Miles!" A young woman rushed up to him, her face flushed with panic. Lena recognized her as Jennifer, one of the event coordinators. "We have a problem. The translator for the Zhang Corporation meeting, she's stuck at O'Hare. Her flight from New York was canceled. The meeting is in 90 minutes. Ethan's easy smile faltered. The Zhang meeting is the cornerstone of this entire summit. Without that deal, I know I'm calling every translation service in the city, but with the summit happening, everyone's booked. What about the university? They must have Mandarin speakers. I've tried. It's exam week. No one's available on such short notice." Lena watched the panic ripple through the group. She knew about Zhang Corporation. She'd been following business news in Chinese publications for practice. They were one of the largest manufacturing distributors in China, and their CEO, Zhang Wei, was notoriously difficult. He insisted on conducting business in Mandarin, viewing it as a test of potential partners' commitment to understanding Chinese culture. Her hands stilled on the tablecloth. She could help. She knew she could. Her Mandarin might not be perfect, but it was certainly good enough for business translation. But that would mean stepping forward, being seen, revealing the secret she'd guarded so carefully. "Don't let your gift die in silence." Harold's words echoed in her mind, but her feet remained planted. This wasn't her world. These weren't her people. She was the invisible girl who cleaned their messes and disappeared. That was safe. That was known. "We'll have to postpone," Ethan was saying, though his expression suggested he knew what that would mean. Zhang Wei didn't give second chances. A postponement would be seen as disrespect, American incompetence. Lena's mother's voice joined Harold's in her head. "Baby fear is just your brain trying to keep you small. But we weren't meant to be small." Still, she couldn't move. The weight of 3 years of hiding, of a lifetime of being unseen, held her in place. She watched as Ethan pulled out his phone, probably to make the call that would kill the deal before it began. She watched as Jennifer, near tears, frantically scrolled through her contacts. She watched as the Chinese delegates in the corner shook their heads, already writing off American business as unprepared and unprofessional. And then she saw Harold. He was standing by the service entrance, having returned for his actual shift. His eyes found hers across the room, and he didn't say anything he didn't have to. He just nodded once with such faith and certainty that something inside Lena cracked open. Her voice emerged before she could stop it, soft but clear. "I speak Mandarin." The words seemed to hang in the air for a moment, as if the universe itself was surprised. Jennifer turned first, her expression confused, trying to locate the source of the voice. Then others followed their eyes, eventually landing on Lena, the cleaning girl, still holding a dust cloth, her gray uniform making her look like she'd materialized from the walls themselves. "I'm sorry, what?" Jennifer's tone was a mixture of confusion and irritation, as if Lena had interrupted something important with nonsense. Lena's throat felt like sandpaper, but she forced herself to speak louder. "I speak Mandarin, fluently. I can translate for the meeting." The silence that followed was deafening. She could feel the weight of every stare, the disbelief, the dismissal already forming on lips. Claudia appeared as if summoned by the potential for humiliation. her face cycling through emotions, shock, anger, and finally, cruel amusement. "The maid!" Claudia's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "This is hardly the time for jokes. Mr. Miles needs a professional translator, not someone who learned ni hao from a fortune cookie." The dismissal should have sent Lena retreating back into silence. It was what she'd always done, absorbed the blow and disappeared. But something was different now. Maybe it was Harold's presence, or the memory of her mother's unfulfilled dreams, or simply the accumulated weight of 3 years of preparation for a moment she'd never thought would come. She set down her dustcloth with deliberate calm and walked toward the group, each step feeling like a small revolution. When she reached them, she looked directly at Ethan Miles, not at his shoes or his shoulder, but directly into his eyes. They were green, she noticed, with flecks of gold that the photographs hadn't captured. Then she spoke not in English, but in perfect Mandarin. "Wo jiao Lena Carter. Wo shuiqi zhongwen san nian le. Wo kei bangzhu nin wancheng zhongyao de huiyi. Zhang wei xiansheng shi yige. Hen nan duifu de ren dan wo liaojie. Ta de yewu fenge he wenhua pianhao." The transformation in the room was instant. The Chinese delegates stopped talking, turning to stare. Jennifer's mouth fell open. And Ethan's expression shifted from polite skepticism to genuine surprise, and then to something that looked like hope. "You said Zhang Wei is difficult, but you understand his business style and cultural preferences." He translated slowly, his own Mandarin clearly functional but not fluent. "How could you possibly know that?" Lena switched back to English, drawing on a confidence she didn't know she possessed. "I read Chinese business publications. Zhang Wei insists on conducting his initial meetings entirely in Mandarin because he believes language reflects commitment. He values precision over flattery, prefers tea served at exactly 75 degrees Celsius, and considers it disrespectful when Americans try to rush through pleasantries to get to business. He spent 3 years in Chicago in the 1990s and has a fondness for deep dish pizza, though he'd never admit it publicly. His company is looking to expand into American markets, but only with partners who demonstrate long-term thinking, something he believes most Western companies lack." The silence stretched again, but this time it was different, charged with possibility rather than dismissal. Ethan studied her with an intensity that made her want to fidget, but she held steady. "Where did you learn?" he began, but Claudia cut him off. "Mr. Miles, I apologize for this interruption. Lena has clearly overstepped her bounds. She's a housekeeper, not a translator. I'm sure her hobby is admirable, but this is a multi-million-dollar deal. You need a professional." "With all due respect, Ms. Winters," Ethan replied, his eyes never leaving Lena's face. "We need someone who speaks fluent Mandarin and understands Zhang Wei's expectations. Right now, that appears to be what was your name again. Lena Carter." She replied, her voice stronger now. "Right now, Ms. Carter appears to be our only option." He glanced at his watch. "The meeting is in 80 minutes. Jennifer, can you find Ms. Carter appropriate business attire? And I'll need 15 minutes to brief her on the deal points." "Mr. Miles," Claudia's voice had taken on a desperate edge. "You can't seriously be considering what I'm seriously considering." Ethan interrupted, his tone suddenly sharp with authority that reminded everyone why he'd built a billion-dollar company, "is saving a deal that could secure 500 American jobs. Unless you have a better solution, Ms. Winters, I suggest you let us work." Claudia's face flushed red, then white. She looked at Lena with such venom that it should have been lethal. But Lena didn't flinch. For the first time in 3 years, maybe for the first time in her life, she didn't feel invisible. Jennifer, recovering from her shock with admirable speed, grabbed Lena's arm. "Come on. I think I have a suit that will fit you. We'll have to do something about your hair, and you'll need makeup." As she was pulled away, Lena caught Harold's eye. He was smiling a broad, proud grin that made her eyes burn with sudden tears. He gave her a small salute, and she knew that whatever happened next, she'd already won something important. The next hour was a whirlwind. Jennifer's emergency suit was a deep blue that somehow made Lena look older, more authoritative. A makeup artist materialized from somewhere, transforming her face with subtle touches that didn't make her look different so much as more herself. Her hair, usually pulled back in a utilitarian ponytail, was styled into a professional bun that made her neck look longer, more elegant. "You clean up nice," Jennifer admitted, sounding almost surprised. "You look like you could be one of those international business consultants." But Lena barely heard her. Ethan had arrived with a tablet full of documents, talking rapidly as she absorbed information about production capabilities, distribution networks, and profit margins. His intensity was infectious, and she found herself asking questions, clarifying points, her business vocabulary expanding with every minute. "The key," he explained, his hand occasionally brushing hers as he pointed to figures on the screen, "is convincing Zhang that we're not just looking for a quick profit. We want a partnership that could last decades. My father built this company on relationships, not just transactions, and that's something the Chinese business culture respects." "You're Mandarin," Lena said suddenly. "It's good, but your tones are inconsistent. Zhang will notice. Let me handle the primary translation, and you can supplement when discussing technical specifications. It will show respect for the language while demonstrating your personal commitment to learning." Ethan looked at her with something like wonder. "Where have you been hiding?" "In plain sight," she replied, surprising herself with the honesty. The conference room where the meeting would take place was on the 20th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. Lena had cleaned this room dozens of times, but she'd never seen it from this perspective, sitting at the polished table instead of polishing it, watching the city spread out below like a promise of possibilities. Zhang Wei arrived exactly on time, accompanied by 3 associates. He was smaller than Lena had expected, with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. He paused when he saw her, clearly not expecting a young black woman as his translator. "Ni hao Zhang Xiansheng." Lena greeted him, her pronunciation perfect, her tone respectful but not obsequious. "Huanying lai dao zhijiage. Women wei nin junbeile longjing cha." She'd gambled on the Dragonwell tea, remembering an article about his preferences. The slight widening of his eyes told her she'd guessed correctly. "Ni de zhongwen hen biaojun," he replied, his tone warming slightly. "Your Chinese is very standard." "Ni zai nali shui shi de." "Where did you study Zixue?" she replied. "Self-taught." "Wo mama yizi mengxiang ku, zhongguo suoyi wo suexi chongwen, lai jinianta." "My mother always dreamed of going to China, so I learned Chinese to honor her." Something shifted in Zhang's expression, a softening that his associates noticed with surprise. Family memory honor, these were concepts that resonated deeply in Chinese culture. The meeting began, and Lena found herself in a dance she'd never performed, but somehow knew every step. She translated not just words, but meaning, catching subtle implications and cultural nuances that could have derailed everything. When Zhang made a joke about American impatience, she translated it perfectly, allowing Ethan to laugh at the right moment. When Ethan explained his company's philosophy, she found the Chinese concepts that paralleled it, building bridges between worldviews. 90 minutes in, when they took a break, Zhang's senior associate pulled her aside. "Ni bu jishi fanyi," he said quietly. "You're not just translating. Ni zai jian qiao liang. You're building bridges. The meeting continued for 3 more hours. By the end, the deal wasn't signed that would take lawyers and more meetings, but the foundation was laid. Zhang shook Ethan's hand, then turned to Lena. Ni de mama hui wei ni gandao jiao hao, he said. Your mother would be proud of you. The words hit her like a physical blow, and she had to blink rapidly to keep tears from falling. She managed a thank you, and then Zhang and his team were gone, leaving her alone with Ethan in the conference room, as the sun set over Lake Michigan, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. You just saved my company, Ethan said quietly. That's not an exaggeration. Without this deal, we were looking at massive layoffs, possibly bankruptcy. You just saved 500 jobs. Lena sank into a chair, the adrenaline finally fading and leaving her exhausted. I just translated. No. Ethan pulled out a chair and sat beside her close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive but not overwhelming. You did something I've never seen before. You didn't just translate language. You translated culture, intention, meaning. Where did you really learn to do that? So she told him. In the golden light of sunset overlooking a city full of dreams deferred and possibilities denied, she told this stranger who'd become something else, everything. About her mother, and the language tapes about the promise whispered in a hospital room, about 3 years of hiding in plain sight, while she built herself into something more than what the world expected her to be. I've watched people like you my whole life, she admitted. Successful people, powerful people, people who matter. I've cleaned your rooms, washed your sheets, been invisible in your presence. And I learned that there's a whole world of communication that happens beyond words, in gesture, in timing, in what's not said as much as what is. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, then asked, What are you doing tomorrow? Working, she replied automatically. My shift starts at 6. No, he said firmly. Tomorrow you're having breakfast with me and my head of international development. We need someone like you on our team, not just for translation, but for strategy. I'm offering you a job, Lena. Director of Cultural Communications, or whatever title you want. Name your salary. The room spun slightly. I can't just... I'm a housekeeper. You're a woman who taught herself one of the world's most difficult languages to honor her mother's memory. You just facilitated a deal that seasoned negotiators couldn't have managed. You're whatever you decide to be. A knock at the door interrupted them. Jennifer poked her head in. Mr. Miles, the reception is starting downstairs. They're asking for you. 5 minutes, Ethan replied, not looking away from Lena. After Jennifer left, he stood and extended his hand to help Lena up. Come to the reception. Let me introduce you to people. You don't have to decide about the job tonight, but at least see what's possible. Lena looked at his hand, manicured, confident, belonging to a world she'd only observed from the margins. Then she thought about Harold's words, about her mother's dreams, about 3 years of preparation for a moment she'd never thought would come. She took his hand. The reception was in full swing when they arrived, hundreds of people in expensive suits, drinking expensive wine and making expensive deals. Lena felt like she'd stepped through the looking glass. Just hours ago, she'd been invisible in this very ballroom. Now Ethan was introducing her as the brilliant translator who saved the Zhang deal. She was shaking hands with a venture capitalist when she saw Claudia across the room. The director of operations was standing with the hotel's general manager, gesturing animatedly in Lena's direction. The manager's expression grew increasingly stern, and Lena knew what was coming. Excuse me, she murmured to the venture capitalist, making her way toward the confrontation rather than away from it. Another revolution facing the storm instead of seeking shelter. Ah, Lena, the general manager, Mr. Hoffman, said as she approached. His tone was carefully neutral, but she could see Claudia's influence in his eyes. I understand there's been some confusion about your role today. No confusion, Mr. Hoffman, Lena replied calmly. Mr. Miles needed an emergency translator. I volunteered. Without authorization, Claudia interjected, her voice sharp. She abandoned her assigned duties and misrepresented herself to a client. This is grounds for immediate termination. A small crowd was forming, drawn by the tension. Lena saw Harold watching from his position by the door, saw Jennifer biting her lip nervously, saw Ethan starting to move toward them. You're right, Lena said, and Claudia's eyes lit with triumph. I did abandon my cleaning duties today, because I chose to use skills I've spent 3 years developing to help save a deal that affects hundreds of families. If that's grounds for termination, then I accept the consequences. Well then, Claudia began, but another voice cut her off. That would be remarkably foolish. Jiang Wei had returned, though the reception hadn't been expecting him. He walked through the parting crowd with the confidence of a man who'd built an empire. To fire someone who possesses such rare talent would be, what is your American phrase, cutting off your nose to spite your face? He looked directly at Mr. Hoffman. I've stayed at hotels around the world, 5-star establishments in Tokyo, London, Dubai, but I've never encountered someone like Ms. Carter, someone who understands that true service isn't about being invisible. It's about seeing what's needed and providing it regardless of job titles or conventions. Then he turned to Lena, switching to Mandarin. Wo xiang ti gong ge ni yige gong zuo. I want to offer you a job. Women shuyao xiang ni zheang de ren zai Shanghai. We need someone like you in Shanghai. The room held its breath. 2 job offers in one day, each representing a different path forward. Lena felt the weight of every eye, every expectation, every possibility. But before she could respond, Ethan was there. With respect, Mr. Zhang, I saw her first. Zhang laughed, a genuine warm sound that transformed his stern face. Americans, he said in accented English, always so competitive. Perhaps we can share. Ms. Carter works with you, but consults for us when we need her expertise. Gentlemen, Lena said, finding her voice, her real voice, not the whisper she'd hidden behind for so long. I'm grateful for both offers, but I need time to think. This morning I was cleaning rooms. Tonight, she gestured at the glittering ballroom, the powerful people, the impossible distance she'd traveled in just a few hours. Tonight, I need to understand who I'm becoming. Zhang nodded approvingly. Wisdom beyond your years. Take your time, Ms. Carter. Some transformations shouldn't be rushed. As he left, Claudia made one last attempt. Mr. Hoffman, surely you're not going to allow Ms. Winters. Hoffman interrupted, his expression thoughtful. I think perhaps you should focus on your own duties. And I'll be reviewing our employee development programs. It seems we've been overlooking talent that was right under our noses. Claudia's face went through several colors before settling on a furious red. She stalked away, her heels clicking like gunshots against the marble. The crowd dispersed, returning to their networking and negotiations, but Harold approached, his eyes bright with pride. You did it, child. You stepped into the light. I'm terrified, Lena admitted quietly. Good, Harold replied. Fear means you're doing something that matters. Your mama would be so proud. The reception continued around them, but Lena found a quiet corner where she could watch and think. Ethan brought her a glass of wine, good wine, she noted, not the stuff she'd sometimes found left over in rooms. No pressure, he said, standing beside her as they watched the sun finally disappear behind the skyline. But I meant what I said. You have something special, Lena. Not just the language skills, but the ability to see what others miss to bridge worlds that seem incompatible. I don't have a degree, she pointed out. I don't have experience. You have something better. You have perspective. You've seen our world from the outside, and now you can help us navigate it better. He paused, then added, plus, you'd be saving me from hiring another consultant who charges $1,000 an hour to tell me things you probably figured out while changing their sheets. Despite everything, Lena laughed. It felt strange laughing with someone like Ethan Miles, but also natural in a way she hadn't expected. Can I ask you something? She said. Why did you take the chance you didn't know if I could really translate? I could have destroyed your deal. Ethan considered the question. Honestly, it was the way you walked over. You'd been invisible and then suddenly you weren't. You walked like someone who'd made a choice, and that kind of courage, that's rare. In my experience, people who are brave enough to step out of their comfort zones are usually brave enough to exceed expectations. They stood in comfortable silence as the reception wound down. Lena caught glimpses of her reflection in the windows, a woman in a borrowed suit, who looked like she belonged here. But underneath, she was still the girl who'd made a promise at her mother's bedside, still the housekeeper who'd found purpose in pursuit of a dream that wasn't quite her own, but had become hers in the process. I'll think about it, she finally said. Both offers, all of it. Fair enough, Ethan replied. But don't think too long. The world has a way of closing doors that stay open too long. As the evening ended, Lena found herself in the employee break room, still wearing Jennifer's suit, but sitting in her usual spot, the corner table where she'd eaten hundreds of lunches in silence. Destiny was there, eyes wide with shock. Girl. Destiny breathed. The entire hotel is talking about you. You spoke Chinese. You saved some huge deal. Claudia looked like she was going to have a stroke. It's been a strange day, Lena admitted. Strange? Destiny laughed. You went from ghost girl to the most talked about person in this building. That's not strange, that's a miracle. But it wasn't a miracle, Lena thought. It was 3 years of discipline when she was exhausted, 3 years of choosing growth over comfort, 3 years of building herself into someone her mother would recognize as brave. That night, she walked home through Chicago's glittering streets, still wearing the suit, because she'd forgotten to change. The city looked different somehow, not bigger or smaller, just full of different possibilities. Her phone had 2 messages, one from Ethan, with a formal job offer that made her eyes water at the salary, and one from Zhang's assistant with an equally impressive consulting proposal. But there was a third message, too, from a number she didn't recognize. When she played the voicemail, it was Harold's voice. Lena, it's Harold. I wanted to tell you something I didn't get a chance to say earlier. I've been teaching again, just tutoring, nothing official. Started a month ago with kids from the neighborhood who need help with history. Seeing you today, watching you choose courage, it reminded me that hiding our gifts doesn't protect us from pain. It just protects us from purpose. Whatever you decide about those jobs, just remember you're not choosing between being a housekeeper and being something else. You're choosing between who you've been and who you're meant to be. And child, from where I'm standing, who you're meant to be is magnificent. Lena saved the message. Then she called the only person she really wanted to talk to, even though she couldn't answer. She called her mother's old phone number, which she'd kept active just to hear the voicemail greeting. Hi, Mom, she said to the recording. I did something today. Something brave. I think you would have been proud. I spoke Mandarin in front of important people. I saved a big business deal. I got job offers from millionaires. But mostly, Mom, I stopped being invisible. I know that wasn't your dream exactly. You wanted to see China not facilitate international business deals. But I think maybe dreams evolve. Maybe they become what we need them to be. I love you. I miss you. And thank you for giving me a dream to chase, even if I caught something different than what we expected. She hung up and stood on the sidewalk, looking up at the Skyline Suites hotel, glowing against the night sky. Tomorrow she'd have to make a decision. Tomorrow she'd have to choose between safe and spectacular, between invisible and seen, between the life she'd built in the shadows and the one beckoning from the spotlight. But tonight, she just wanted to savor this moment, this in-between space where she was no longer who she'd been, but not yet who she'd become. It was terrifying and exhilarating and perfect in its uncertainty. A car pulled up to the curb and Ethan Miles stepped out. "I thought you might need a ride home," he said, as if CEOs regularly drove housekeepers home from hotels. "How did you know where to find me?" "Harold," he admitted with a sheepish grin. "He said you always stand here for a minute after your shift looking up at the building. He said you've been seeing something the rest of us missed." Lena looked at this man, this powerful, successful man who'd taken a chance on her, who saw something in her that she was only beginning to see in herself. "I wasn't seeing something you missed," she said. "I was seeing something I thought I'd never have a place in your world." "Our world," Ethan corrected gently. "It's our world now, Lena, if you want it." She thought about her mother, about dreams deferred and promises kept in unexpected ways. She thought about Harold returning to teaching, because courage was contagious. She thought about Zhang Wei offering her Shanghai, like it was a casual possibility instead of an impossible dream. She thought about herself, 3 years of solitary study finally given voice. "Yes," she said, the word carrying the weight of every yes she'd swallowed in silence. "I want it." As she got into the car, a Tesla, she noted with amusement. Of course it was a Tesla. She caught her reflection in the window one more time. The woman looking back at her wasn't invisible anymore. She was luminous, incandescent with possibility. The city streamed past the windows as Ethan drove, making small talk about the conference, the other deals in play, the challenges of international business. But Lena was only half listening. She was thinking about transformation, about the moment when a caterpillar realizes it has wings, about the courage it takes to leave the safety of the cocoon. "You know," Ethan said as they pulled up to her apartment building, a modest complex that looked even shabbier next to his pristine car. Most people would have never revealed they spoke Mandarin. They would have kept that secret forever safe in their silence. "Most people didn't promise their dying mother they'd live her dreams," Lena replied. "Is that what this is, living her dream?" Lena considered the question as she gathered her things. "No," she said finally. Her dream was to walk the Great Wall, to eat dumplings in Beijing, to experience China as a tourist. This, whatever this becomes, is my dream. Built on the foundation of hers, maybe, but mine nonetheless. "Good," Ethan said. "Because I have a feeling your dreams are going to take you places even you haven't imagined yet." As she walked to her apartment, Lena felt the weight of the day settling on her shoulders, not heavily, but significantly. She'd started the morning as a ghost, moving through the world unseen and unheard. She was ending it with 2 job offers, a closet full of possibilities, and the terrifying, exhilarating knowledge that she'd never be invisible again. Inside her apartment, she looked at the stack of Mandarin textbooks on her desk, the flashcards covering her refrigerator, the Chinese news apps on her phone. For 3 years, these had been her secret garden, carefully tended in private. Now they were her credentials, her proof that transformation was possible if you were willing to do the work when no one was watching. She pulled out her laptop and began typing, "Dear Mr. Miles and Mr. Zhang, Thank you both for your generous offers. After careful consideration, I would like to propose a solution that honors both opportunities. As she wrote outlining a plan to work for Miles Industries while consulting for Zhang Corporation, she felt her mother's presence not as a ghost or a weight, but as a warm encouragement, a whispered yes to the life she was choosing. Outside her window, Chicago glittered with promise. Somewhere in the city, Harold was teaching history to eager students. Somewhere Claudia was probably plotting revenge. Somewhere deals were being made and dreams were being deferred or fulfilled. But here, in a small apartment, filled with the evidence of quiet determination, Lena Carter was writing her own story. It began with a whispered promise in a hospital room and led to a moment of courage in a hotel ballroom. Where it would end, she didn't know. But for the first time in her life, she couldn't wait to find out. The morning after writing her proposal, Lena woke to 17 missed calls. Her ancient phone, which usually sat silent except for telemarketing robots, buzzed insistently on her nightstand, like an angry wasp. She grabbed it still groggy from a night of dreams where she'd been speaking Mandarin to her mother while standing on the Great Wall. "Lena!" Jennifer's voice was pitched high with panic. "Where are you? Mr. Miles has been trying to reach you all morning. There's an emergency." The words sent ice through her veins. Had she misunderstood something yesterday? Had the deal fallen through? What's wrong? Zhang Wei's translator, his personal one from Beijing, she arrived this morning. She's telling everyone you mistranslated key portions of yesterday's negotiation. Claudia's with her right now in Mr. Hoffman's office, and they're saying you might have sabotaged the entire deal. Lena sat up so fast the room spun. "That's impossible. I translated everything accurately." "I believe you, but you need to get here now. The Chinese delegation is meeting with Ethan in an hour, and if they think there was deception..." Lena was already pulling on clothes, her hands shaking slightly. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. "Lena, wear something professional. You're not the cleaning lady anymore." The words should have been encouraging, but as Lena looked at her closet full of worn jeans and the gray housekeeping uniforms, she realized she didn't own anything professional. Yesterday's suit had been Jennifer's. She grabbed the least faded of her black pants and a white blouse she'd bought for her mother's funeral, hoping the combination would pass for business casual. The taxi ride to the hotel felt endless. The driver kept glancing at her in the mirror as she practiced Mandarin phrases under her breath, reviewing every word she'd translated yesterday, searching for any possible error. But she knew she hadn't made mistakes. Her translation had been accurate, nuanced, careful. So why was Zhang's translator claiming otherwise? She found her answer the moment she walked into the hotel lobby. Standing next to Claudia wearing an impeccable cream-colored suit and an expression of cool superiority was a woman who looked like she'd stepped from the pages of a fashion magazine. She was everything Lena wasn't: tall, elegant with that particular polish that came from international universities and family money. "Ah," Claudia said, her voice dripping satisfaction. "Here's our translator now. Lena, this is Ms. Victoria Chen, Mr. Zhang's senior linguistic specialist. She has a master's from Harvard and has been translating for Fortune 500 companies for 15 years. Victoria looked Lena up and down her assessment, taking less than 2 seconds and clearly finding her wanting. "You're the housekeeper who claimed to speak Mandarin." Her English was perfect, with just enough of an accent to sound sophisticated rather than foreign. "I don't claim to speak it," Lena replied, keeping her voice steady. "I do speak it." Victoria laughed, a tinkling sound that drew attention from passing hotel guests. "Is that so? Then perhaps you can explain why you told Mr. Zhang that Mr. Miles was interested in a long-term partnership when Mr. Miles actually said permanent relationship. The implications in Chinese business culture are vastly different. Lena frowned. I didn't. Mr. Miles said long-term partnership. I translated it as Changqi Heizuo Huoban Guanxi. The meaning was preserved exactly. I have the recording, Victoria said, producing her phone with a flourish. Mr. Miles clearly says, then play it. Ethan's voice cut through the lobby like a blade. He strode toward them, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by something harder, more dangerous. Harold was with him, and behind them, surprisingly, was Zhang Wei himself. Victoria's composure flickered. Mr. Miles, I was just explaining to your assistant that there were some concerning discrepancies. Play the recording, Ethan repeated. Victoria touched her phone screen, and Ethan's voice filled the lobby discussing the partnership. But something was wrong. The audio was choppy edited. Lena could hear the cuts where words had been rearranged. That's been altered, she said, her voice carrying more authority than she'd ever heard from herself. Listen to the ambient sound levels. They jump at 3 different points. Someone spliced different parts of the conversation together. Zhang Wei stepped forward, his expression unreadable. He said something rapid in Mandarin to Victoria, who replied defensively. But Lena caught the doubt in his voice, the slight narrowing of his eyes. Mr. Zhang, Lena said in Mandarin, her tone respectful but firm. If you have any doubts about my translation, I invite you to test me. Here now in front of everyone. Ask me anything. Have me translate anything. Let me prove that I represented your interests faithfully. The lobby had gone quiet. Hotel guests and staff alike seemed to sense something significant was happening. Claudia's face had taken on an interesting purple shade, while Victoria's perfect composure showed its first real crack. Zhang Wei studied Lena for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. There's no need, Ms. Carter. You see, I've been fluent in English for 30 years. I understood every word Mr. Miles said yesterday, and every word you translated. You were flawless. The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Claudia took a step backward as if physically pushed. Then why? Ethan began, but Zhang held up a hand. This was a test, but not of Ms. Carter. It was a test of you, Mr. Miles, and your organization. In Chinese business, we have a saying, the true nature of water is revealed when the pot boils. I needed to see if you would stand by Ms. Carter when her credibility was questioned, or if you would abandon her for someone with more impressive credentials. He turned to Victoria, his voice becoming cold. You were hired by my competitor, weren't you? They wanted to sabotage this deal, and you thought using my name would give you credibility. He said something else in rapid Mandarin that made Victoria go pale. You're fired, obviously, and I'll be informing the Translation Certification Board about your ethical violations. Victoria fled, her heels clicking rapidly against the marble as she disappeared through the revolving doors. Claudia started to edge away as well, but Mr. Hoffman's voice stopped her. Ms. Winters, my office. Now. As Claudia trudged away, Zhang turned back to Lena. I apologize for the deception, Ms. Carter. But in my experience, the most valuable people are often those who are tested by fire and don't burn. You've proven yourself twice now, once with your skills and once with your courage to stand up to false accusations. I don't understand, Lena said, still processing what had happened. You knew Victoria was a fraud. I suspected it the moment she appeared this morning, claiming to be my translator. My actual translator is in Beijing with the flu. But I wanted to see how everyone would react to you, Mr. Miles, and the hotel management. He paused, looking at Harold with interest. You knew too, didn't you? Harold nodded slowly. Recognized her from a conference last year. She was translating for a different company than one of your competitors. Figured you were running some kind of test. Why didn't you say anything? Lena asked him. Because you didn't need me to, Harold replied simply. You had it handled. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, looking both relieved and exhausted. Mr. Zhang, with all due respect, that was a hell of a risk. What if I'd believed Victoria? What if I'd terminated our arrangement with Lena? Then you would have failed the test, and I would have known you weren't the right partner for my company. Business isn't just about profits, Mr. Miles. It's about loyalty, judgment, and the ability to recognize value wherever it appears. He looked at Lena again, even when it comes in unexpected packages. Before anyone could respond, Zhang's phone rang. He answered it, his expression quickly becoming serious. He spoke rapidly in Mandarin, and Lena caught enough to understand that something was wrong with a shipment, something about customs and documentation. I apologize, Zhang said, ending the call. There's a crisis with our Shanghai facility. A shipment of critical components is being held at customs and our documentation specialist is unavailable. If we don't resolve this in the next 6 hours, we'll miss our production deadline and face massive penalties. What kind of documentation? Ethan asked. Technical specifications, compliance certificates, translation of manufacturing standards from English to Mandarin. It's extremely specialized work. I need to fly back immediately to handle it personally. Lena heard herself speaking before she'd consciously decided to. I can do it. Everyone turned to look at her. Zhang's expression was skeptical. Ms. Carter, this isn't simple translation. It requires understanding of international trade law, technical manufacturing terminology, and Chinese customs regulations. I know, Lena said, her mind racing. I've been studying more than just language for the past 3 years. I wanted to understand the full context of business communication, so I took online courses in international trade, studied technical manuals, read everything I could find about import/export regulations. It was true. Late nights when she couldn't sleep, haunted by her mother's unfulfilled dreams, she dove deep into anything related to China. It had started as a way to feel closer to her mother's dream, but it had become her own obsession, her own path to something more. Show me, Zhang said simply. He pulled out his phone, bringing up a document in English technical specifications for electronic components. Translate this. Not just the words, but in a way that will satisfy Chinese customs officials. Lena took the phone, scanning the document quickly. It was complex, full of technical jargon and measurements, but she'd seen similar documents in her studies. She began translating aloud, not just converting words, but adapting the format to match Chinese documentation standards, adding the specific phrases that customs officials expected to see. Stop, Zhang said after 5 minutes. He was smiling again, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his stern face. Mr. Miles, I want to modify our arrangement. I want Ms. Carter to work for both of us officially. Split her time between Chicago and Shanghai. She'll be our bridge. That's what I proposed in my email this morning, Lena said quietly. You sent it to both of us at 3 a.m., Ethan added, pulling out his phone. A detailed proposal for a joint position. I was coming to accept it when Jennifer called about the emergency. Zhang looked between them, then laughed, a full, rich sound that drew stares from across the lobby. Of course you did. Ms. Carter, you continue to surprise. Very well. Mr. Miles, shall we make this official? The next 2 hours were a whirlwind of contracts, negotiations, and phone calls. Lena found herself in the same conference room where yesterday she'd been a last-minute substitute, but now she was sitting as an equal, discussing her own terms. The salary they agreed on was more than she'd ever imagined, more than her mother had made in 5 years of cleaning buildings. There's one condition, she said, as they were finalizing the paperwork. Both men looked at her with surprise. She hadn't made any demands so far. I want to fund a scholarship program for children of service workers who want to learn languages, named after Elizabeth Carter. Your mother, Zhang said. It wasn't a question. She died with dreams unfulfilled because she never had the opportunity to pursue them. I don't want other kids growing up watching their parents defer dreams because education is out of reach. Done, Ethan said immediately. The company will match whatever you contribute. As will mine, Zhang added. The Elizabeth Carter International Language Fund. It has a good sound. As they shook hands sealing the deal, Harold appeared in the doorway. Lena, there's something you need to see. They followed him to the employee break room where a crowd had gathered. On the old television that usually played soap operas during lunch, the local news was running a segment. Lena's photograph, the one from her hotel ID badge, was on the screen. The remarkable story of Lena Carter, a hotel housekeeper who saved $1 billion international deal with her hidden language skills, the anchor was saying. Sources say Ms. Carter taught herself Mandarin while working full-time studying in secret for 3 years. Who called the news? Lena asked, mortified. I did, Jennifer admitted, looking proud. This is a great story, Lena. People need to hear it. Do you know how many invisible workers are out there hiding their talents because they think they don't belong in corporate spaces? The report continued, including an interview with a professor from the University of Chicago's linguistics department, who called Lena's achievement extraordinary and a testament to human determination. They'd even found a photo of her mother from the hospital where she'd worked, a tired-looking woman with Lena's same determined eyes. Ms. Carter has agreed to an exclusive interview tomorrow morning. The anchor continued, and Lena whirled to face Jennifer. I haven't agreed to anything. You will, Jennifer said confidently, because this isn't just about you anymore. It's about every person who's been told they don't belong, that they should stay in their lane, that dreams are for other people. Before Lena could respond, her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but she answered anyway. Ms. Carter. This is Rebecca Liu from the Chicago Tribune. We'd like to do a feature story on you for our Sunday edition. I need to think about it. Of course, but Ms. Carter, my mother was a housekeeper too. She died without ever seeing me graduate from journalism school. Your story, it matters to people like us. Lena hung up, overwhelmed. In 48 hours, she'd gone from invisible to what felt like hypervisible. It was disorienting, like suddenly seeing her reflection in every surface after years of avoiding mirrors. I need some air, she said, pushing through the crowd. She found herself on the hotel's roof, a place she'd discovered during her first week of work. It wasn't officially accessible to employees, but the lock had been broken for years, and no one had bothered to fix it. From here, she could see the entire city sprawled out beneath her Lake Michigan, stretching endlessly eastward. Thought I'd find you here. She didn't turn as Ethan joined her at the railing. How did you know? Harold. He says you come up here when you're overwhelmed. He's quite protective of you, you know. He's been the only one who really saw me. Before yesterday, I mean. That's not true, Ethan said quietly. You were seen. Maybe not acknowledged, but seen. I remember you from a month ago. I was having a terrible day. The Zhang deal was falling apart. My father was in the hospital. Everything was going wrong. I was sitting in my suite at 2 a.m. trying not to have a panic attack when you came in to clean. You saw me there, clearly a mess, and you just worked around me. But you hummed while you worked. Some song I didn't recognize, but it was soothing, peaceful. You left a chocolate on my pillow, not the standard hotel chocolate, something different. Better. Lena remembered that night. She'd felt his despair like a physical presence in the room and had wanted to help, but didn't know how. The chocolate was from her personal stash, a good brand she splurged on once a month, her one indulgence. The humming was a lullaby, she said. One my mother used to sing. In Mandarin, actually. She learned it from those tapes. It helped, Ethan said. More than you know. I think that's when I first understood that invisible doesn't mean absent. That the people we don't see are often the ones holding everything together. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city pulse with life below. Somewhere down there, Claudia was probably clearing out her office. Mr. Hoffman had made it clear her services were no longer required. Somewhere, Harold was telling his tutoring students about standing up for what's right. Somewhere, Victoria Chen was probably trying to salvage her career. Are you ready for this? Ethan asked. The visibility, the pressure, the travel. Your life is about to change in ways you can't imagine. No, Lena admitted. I'm not ready, but I wasn't ready to lose my mother either. I wasn't ready to spend 3 years as a ghost in my own life. Sometimes ready is a luxury we don't get. Her phone buzzed with another call. This time it was a number with a Shanghai prefix. She answered in Mandarin, listening as Zhang's assistant outlined travel arrangements for her first trip to China in 3 days. 3 days, she said in English for Ethan's benefit. That's so soon. The customs issue is urgent, the assistant explained. Mr. Zhang wants you there to oversee the documentation personally. You'll be in Shanghai for 2 weeks, then Beijing for meetings with other potential partners. Beijing, where her mother had dreamed of going, where the Great Wall waited patient and eternal. I'll be ready, she said, ending the call. I should go, Ethan said. Let you process all this. But Lena, don't let them change you. The media, the corporate world, the money, don't let it erode what makes you special. The world needs people who remember what it's like to be invisible. After he left, Lena remained on the roof as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The same sun that would rise over Shanghai in a few hours, over a country her mother had loved from afar, over possibilities that still felt surreal. Her phone rang again. This time she didn't recognize the number at all. Hello, Lena Carter. The voice was old, fragile, but with an underlying strength. My name is Pearl Washington. I'm Harold's sister. Oh, he's mentioned you. You live in Atlanta, right? I do, but I'm calling because I saw you on the news just now. Harold doesn't know I'm calling, and I'd appreciate if you didn't tell him just yet. But I need to thank you. Thank me for what? For giving him his courage back. He called me last night talking about you, about how you stepped out of the shadows. He told me he's teaching again, really teaching. He hasn't sounded that alive since Dolores passed 5 years ago. You did that. You reminded him that it's never too late to reclaim yourself. After Pearl hung up, Lena felt tears sliding down her cheeks. She hadn't cried yesterday through all the triumph and terror. But now, understanding that her courage had sparked someone else's, the tears came freely. The city lights were beginning to twinkle as darkness fell. Tomorrow, she had the interview. In 3 days, Shanghai. Sometime after that, a new life she couldn't quite envision yet. But tonight, she had one more thing to do. She took the elevator down to the basement, to the employee lockers. Hers was still full of her things, the extra uniform, the comfortable shoes, the small collection of items guests had left behind that she'd grown attached to. She began packing them into a box, not because she was ashamed of them, but because she wanted to keep them to remember. You're not throwing those away, are you? Destiny stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. No, just taking them home. Good. Don't forget where you came from, Lena. Some of these people who are about to become your new best friends, they'll want you to forget. They'll want you to pretend you were always one of them. Don't let them. I won't, Lena promised. Destiny stepped forward, surprising Lena with a fierce hug. You know what this means, right? For all of us, you just proved that we're not furniture, that we have value beyond our job titles. You always had value, Destiny. Maybe, but now they know it too. As Lena left the hotel that night carrying her box of memories, she passed through the lobby one more time. The night shift was on duty. People she knew had worked alongside had been invisible with. Some nodded at her with respect, others with something that looked like hope. Marcus the bellhop, who'd called her Ghost Girl that very morning, approached hesitantly. Hey Lena, I wanted to apologize for all the times I was an ass. And to ask, I've been writing, stories about the stuff we see here, the guests, the drama. Do you think, could you look at them sometime? Maybe tell me if they're any good. Send them to me, she said, meaning it. I'll read them on the plane to Shanghai. He beamed like she'd offered him gold, and she realized this was part of it too, not just her own transformation, but the permission it gave others to transform as well. The taxi ride home was quiet, but her apartment was not. When she opened the door, she found Harold sitting on her stoop with a bottle of champagne and 2 plastic cups. Figured you could use a proper celebration, he said. And maybe some company. Big changes are easier when you're not facing them alone. They sat on her fire escape drinking champagne and watching the city sleep. Harold told her about his students, about the one who'd just gotten into college, the first in his family. Lena told him about Shanghai, about her mother's dream finally taking shape, even if it looked different than originally imagined. Your mama would be over the moon, Harold said. Not just about China, but about you using your voice. She was quiet too, wasn't she? Like you. Even quieter, Lena admitted. I think that's part of why she never pursued her dreams. She couldn't imagine taking up that much space in the world. And now her daughter's about to take up space on 2 continents. Harold raised his cup in a toast. To Elizabeth Carter, who dreamed in silence but raised a daughter who speaks loud and clear. As midnight approached, Harold stood to leave. Get some sleep, child. Tomorrow starts the rest of your life. But Lena couldn't sleep. She sat at her desk, surrounded by her Mandarin books, and began writing. Not a business email or a translation, but a letter to her mother. She wrote about everything, the fear, the triumph, the surreal nature of going from invisible to illuminated in the span of 2 days. She wrote about Zhang Wei and his test about Ethan, and his midnight despair about Harold, and his return to teaching. She wrote until her hand cramped and her eyes burned, and when she was done, she had 20 pages of confession and gratitude and grief and joy. She folded the pages carefully and placed them in the box with her mother's language tapes. Tomorrow, she'd take them to the cemetery, leave them on the grave like an offering. The next morning came too quickly. Jennifer arrived at 6 a.m. with a makeup artist and a wardrobe selection that made Lena's head spin. The interview is at 8, Jennifer explained, transforming Lena's small apartment into a makeshift salon. The Tribune wants to do a photo shoot too. Then you have lunch with the mayor's office. They want to honor you with some kind of citizenship award. After that, 3 more interviews, including one with CNN. CNN. Lena's stomach churned. This is too much. This is just the beginning, Jennifer said, but not unkindly. You're a symbol now, Lena. Like it or not, your story represents something bigger than just you. The makeup artist worked in silence, transforming Lena's face with subtle touches that somehow made her look like herself, only more so. The clothes Jennifer had brought were professional, but not stuffy. A deep purple blazer that brought out the warmth in her skin, pants that actually fit properly, shoes that were somehow both elegant and comfortable. You look like a director of international development, Jennifer said approvingly. I look like someone playing dress-up, Lena countered. But even she had to admit the woman in the mirror looked capable, confident, like someone who belonged in boardrooms and international negotiations. The news crew arrived, transforming her tiny living room into a television set. The reporter, a polished woman named Sandra Kim, sat across from her with an expression of genuine interest. So Lena, she began once the cameras were rolling, tell us about the moment you decided to reveal your hidden talent. Lena thought about that moment, the frozen instant, when she'd stood between two worlds, one safe and known, the other terrifying and full of possibility. It wasn't really a decision, she said slowly, finding her truth as she spoke. It was more like recognition, like suddenly seeing that the door I'd been looking for had been there all along. I just had to be brave enough to walk through it. Were you afraid? Terrified? But there's something my mother used to say, fear is just your brain trying to keep you small. I'd been small for long enough. The interview continued for an hour, covering her mother's influence, her years of secret study, the dramatic meeting with Zhang Wei. But it was the last question that struck deepest. What would you say to other invisible workers out there, people with hidden talents who think they don't belong in professional spaces? Lena looked directly at the camera, imagining all the people like her cleaning offices, driving buses, stocking shelves, all while harboring dreams they thought were too big for their circumstances. Your talents are not hobbies, she said firmly. They're not lesser because you developed them outside of universities or corporate training programs. The skills you build in your own time with your own determination are just as valuable as anyone else's. Maybe more so because you built them against the odds. Don't wait for permission to be brilliant. The world needs what you have to offer. After the crew left, Lena sat in her suddenly quiet apartment, feeling the weight of her own words. She'd meant them every one, but now she had to live up to them. In 2 days, she'd be on a plane to Shanghai, stepping into a role she'd never imagined representing, not just herself, but everyone who'd ever been told to stay in their lane. Her phone rang. Zhang Wei, calling from Shanghai. Ms. Carter, I watched your interview. They're streaming it live internationally. You spoke well. Thank you, Mr. Zhang. No, thank you. You said something important about talents not needing institutional validation. That's something we often forget in business, that innovation and excellence can come from anywhere. He paused. When you arrive in Shanghai, I want you to speak to our entire management team. Tell them your story. Remind them to look for talent in unexpected places. I'm not a public speaker, Mr. Zhang. You weren't a translator either until you were. You weren't a negotiator until you were. You weren't visible until you chose to be. Stop telling yourself what you're not, Ms. Carter, and start discovering what you are. After he hung up, Lena sat with his words. He was right, of course. She'd spent so much time defining herself by what she wasn't, not educated enough, not polished enough, not born into the right circumstances, that she'd almost missed discovering what she was determined, capable, brave enough to transform. The rest of the day passed in a blur of interviews and ceremonies. The mayor did indeed present her with a citizenship award for exemplifying the American dream through determination and self-improvement. The CNN interview was terrifying but exhilarating, reaching millions of viewers worldwide. By evening, her story was trending on social media with hashtags like #InvisibleNoMore and #TheCleaningLadyWhoSaved. But the moment that mattered most came that evening when she stood at her mother's grave with the letter she'd written. The cemetery was quiet, peaceful in the way that only places of ending could be. She knelt by the simple headstone, Elizabeth Carter, beloved mother, dreamer of dreams, and placed the pages against the stone. I'm going to China, Mom, she whispered. Not the way we planned, not as tourists with cameras and guidebooks. I'm going as someone who matters, someone whose voice is heard. I'm going to walk the Great Wall, and when I do, I'll carry you with me. Every step will be for both of us." The wind picked up, scattering the pages of her letter, like white birds taking flight. She didn't try to catch them. Some messages were meant to be released, not held. That night, her apartment was full of people. Harold was there, of course, and Jennifer, and surprisingly Destiny and Marcus, and a dozen other hotel workers she'd been invisible beside for 3 years. They brought food and wine and stories, turning her farewell into a celebration. To Lena. Harold raised his glass as midnight approached. Who reminded us all that we're not just what we do, but what we're capable of becoming. To the Elizabeth Carter International Language Fund, Jennifer added, already planning fundraising events in her head. To second chances, Destiny said, and the courage to take them. To visibility, Marcus added, even when it's terrifying. But it was Ethan who offered the last toast, arriving late, but bringing with him a gift, a leather journal embossed with her initials. To transformation, he said simply, and to the people brave enough to choose it. As the party wound down and people began to leave, Ethan pulled her aside. "I have something to tell you. My father, he's in the hospital recovering from heart surgery. He's been following your story. He wants to meet you when you get back from Shanghai." Why? Because 40 years ago he was a mechanic who taught himself business by reading books in the public library. Everyone told him he didn't belong in corporate America. He wants to tell you something he learned, that outsiders who fight their way in often see things insiders miss. That's what makes them valuable. The next morning, Lena's last in Chicago for a while, she stood again in the hotel where everything had changed. But this time she was in the penthouse conference room, signing the final contracts for her new position. The view was spectacular. The city spread out like a promised Lake Michigan, stretching toward horizons she'd soon cross. "There's one more thing," Zhang said, appearing with a small wrapped package. "A gift for your journey." Inside was a compass, old and brass, with Chinese characters engraved on the back. "It says, 'All journeys begin with a single step, but direction matters more than distance,'" Zhang translated. "It was my grandfather's. He gave it to me when I left China to study in America 40 years ago. Now I give it to you as you make the opposite journey." "I can't accept this," Lena protested. "It's too valuable." "Value isn't just monetary, Ms. Carter. You've taught us that. Besides, you'll need it. Shanghai can be overwhelming for newcomers. When you feel lost, remember you already know the direction. You've been walking toward it for 3 years. The compass felt heavy in Lena's pocket as the plane descended through the clouds above Shanghai, revealing a city that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. 22 hours of travel had left her exhausted, but wire alert her mind, cycling between English and Mandarin, as if preparing for battle. Through the window, she could see the Huangpu River winding through the metropolis, like a golden snake dividing the historic Bund from the futuristic skyline of Pudong. "First time in Shanghai?" The businessman beside her asked in English, noting her intense focus on the view. "First time in China," she admitted, then repeated it in Mandarin just to feel the words in her mouth. The language felt different here, weightier, like it had finally found its home. Zhang's assistant, a efficient young woman named Mei Lin, met her at the airport holding a sign with her name in both English and Chinese characters. The ride to the hotel was a sensory assault, neon signs, endless crowds, the smell of street food mixing with exhaust fumes, the constant symphony of car horns and construction. Lena pressed her face to the window, trying to absorb it all, trying to reconcile the China of her mother's documentaries with this pulsing, ultra-modern reality. "Mr. Zhang has arranged for you to rest today," Mei Lin explained as they pulled up to the Peace Hotel, a Art Deco masterpiece on the Bund. "Tomorrow morning at 7, You'll meet him at the customs office to resolve the documentation crisis. But Lena couldn't rest. After checking into her room, a suite that overlooked the river paid for by Zhang's company, she found herself walking the streets, her mother's ghost beside her with every step. Elizabeth would have loved this, would have stopped at every food cart, attempted conversation with every vendor. Taken 1,000 pictures of ordinary things that seemed extraordinary simply because they were Chinese. Her phone rang as she stood on the bund, watching the sunset paint the skyscrapers gold. It was Ethan calling from Chicago, where it was still early morning. "How's Shanghai?" he asked, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Overwhelming. Beautiful. Nothing like I expected, and exactly what I hoped." She paused, watching a grandmother teaching her grandchild Tai Chi in the fading light. "I keep thinking about my mother. She would have cried seeing this." "She's seeing it through you," Ethan said gently. "That counts for something." "Does it? Sometimes I feel like I'm stealing her dream, living it without her." "No, Lena. You're completing it. There's a difference." After they hung up, she continued walking until she found herself in Yu Garden, a classical Chinese garden that felt like stepping back in time. The rocks and water, the careful placement of every element, the way peace seemed to exist, despite the chaos of the city. Beyond the walls, it was poetry in physical form. She sat on a stone bench and pulled out the journal Ethan had given her, writing her first impressions, trying to capture the feeling of being simultaneously foreign and home. A voice interrupted her solitude. "Your calligraphy is interesting. Self-taught?" She looked up to find an elderly man watching her, his face weathered but kind. She'd been unconsciously practicing Chinese characters as she wrote, mixing them with English in her journal. "Yes," she replied in Mandarin. "I'm still learning." "Aren't we all?" He sat beside her without invitation, the way old people did when they recognized someone who needed wisdom. "You're the American who saved Zhang Wei's deal. It's in all the business papers. News travels fast. In Shanghai, news travels at the speed of light. But stories travel at the speed of heart. And yours is a good story. The invisible woman who became essential." He pulled out a worn photograph from his pocket, a young woman standing in front of an American university. "My daughter. She was a cleaning woman in San Francisco for 10 years while she studied law at night. Now she's a partner at an international firm. Some of us understand the weight of transformation. Was it worth it for her?" The old man considered this. "She says the success isn't the point. The becoming is the point. The person she had to become to achieve success, that's the real treasure." And he stood to leave, then turned back. "Zhang Wei is a good man, but he's also a test. Everything with him is a test. Remember that tomorrow." She wanted to ask what he meant, but he was already disappearing into the growing darkness, leaving her alone with the garden's ancient wisdom and her racing thoughts. That night, she barely slept. The customs office situation was more complex than she'd initially understood. It wasn't just about translation, it was about navigating the Byzantine world of Chinese bureaucracy, understanding unwritten rules, reading between lines that weren't even visible to most Western eyes. She studied the documents Mei Lin had sent until her eyes burned, cross-referencing regulations, memorizing specific phrases that might unlock official doors. At 3 a.m., her phone buzzed with a message from Harold. "Channel 7 just ran another segment about you. You're inspiring kids all over Chicago to learn languages. Thought you should know you're changing lives from across the world." She thought about responding, but what could she say? That she felt like an imposter? That she was terrified of failing? That every success felt like stepping further onto a tightrope with no net below? Instead, she returned to the documents, finding comfort in the concrete challenge of technical translation. Mei Lin arrived at exactly 6:30 a.m. looking perfectly composed, despite the early hour. The ride to the customs office was silent. Lena reviewing her notes while Shanghai woke around them. The city looked different in the morning light. Less magical, more mechanical, millions of people beginning their daily dance of survival and ambition. The customs office was a gray fortress of bureaucracy, the kind of place where dreams went to die in triplicate. Zhang was already there, looking unusually tense as he spoke rapidly with a customs official who seemed immune to his usual commanding presence. "Ah, Ms. Carter." His relief was palpable. "The situation is worse than I thought. They're claiming our documentation doesn't meet new standards that were apparently implemented yesterday without notice. We have 4 hours before they auction our shipment to cover storage fees." "Show me everything," Lena said, slipping into professional mode. The next 3 hours were a masterclass in cultural navigation. The issue wasn't really the documentation, it was technically correct. The problem was presentation formatting, the subtle dance of giving face while standing firm. Lena found herself drawing on every bit of knowledge she'd absorbed, not just about language, but about culture, about the way respect and authority flowed in Chinese institutional settings. "May I?" she asked Zhang at one point, gesturing toward the official who'd been stonewalling them. Zhang nodded, curious. Lena approached the official, a middle-aged man, whose desk nameplate read, "Director Chen," and did something unexpected. Instead of launching into business, she complimented the calligraphy scroll hanging behind his desk, noting the classical poem it contained and asking about its origin. Director Chen's expression shifted from bureaucratic indifference to genuine interest. They spent 10 minutes discussing Tang Dynasty poetry, before she seamlessly transitioned to the documentation issue, framing it not as a challenge to his authority, but as an opportunity for him to demonstrate his wisdom in interpreting the new regulations. She referenced similar situations in other ports, showing she understood the complexity of his position. She made him the hero of the story rather than the obstacle. "Your Mandarin, Sir," Director Chen said finally. "It's unusual. Formal but not stiff. Where did you study?" "From books and tapes my mother bought at garage sales," she replied honestly. She dreamed of coming to China but never made it. I learned to honor her memory. Something shifted in his expression. "My father wanted to visit America his whole life. Died without seeing the Statue of Liberty." He stamped the documents with decisive force. "Your shipment is cleared. Tell Zhang Wei he's fortunate to have found someone who understands that business is really about people." Outside the customs office, Zhang studied her with new interest. That wasn't just translation. That was artistry. "It was necessity," Lena corrected. Director Chen wasn't blocking the shipment because of documentation. He was blocking it because he felt disrespected by the assumption that money and power could override his authority. "I just helped him save face while doing what he probably wanted to do anyway." "How could you know that?" "Because I've been invisible in rooms with powerful people for 3 years. You learn to read the real conversation happening beneath the surface." Director Chen reminded me of Mr. Hoffman at the hotel, someone who'd worked his way up and was sensitive about being treated like a rubber stamp. Zhang's phone rang before he could respond. He answered in rapid Mandarin, his expression growing increasingly serious. When he hung up, his face was grim. "We have a problem. A bigger one. Our main competitor, Huang Industries, has called an emergency meeting of the Shanghai Manufacturing Council. They're claiming our deal with Miles Industries violates certain trade agreements. If they convince the council, our partnership could be dead before it begins." "When's the meeting?" "In 2 hours. And it's conducted entirely in Mandarin with no translation allowed. They think Ethan won't be able to defend the deal himself. He paused. They don't know about you. The council meeting was held in a gleaming tower that scraped the Shanghai sky. The conference room was intimidating in its understated power, dark wood, subtle lighting, and 20 of Shanghai's most influential business leaders arranged around a table that probably cost more than Lena's previous annual salary. Ethan was already there, having flown in on a red-eye that morning. He looked tired but determined, his usual easy confidence replaced by focused intensity. Lena, thank God. They've been speaking in Mandarin for the past 20 minutes, clearly discussing our deal, and I can only catch about half of it. Mr. Miles, the council chairman, a severe woman named Madame Liu, said in accented English, this meeting will be conducted in Mandarin. If you cannot participate fully, perhaps you should reconsider whether you're ready for Chinese partnerships. I understand, Ethan replied calmly. Fortunately, my director of cultural communications is fluent. The dismissive looks that followed were familiar to Lena, the same expressions she'd seen in the hotel ballroom just days ago. A young black woman in a room full of Chinese business titans and American executives. She didn't fit anyone's picture of a bridge between worlds. The competitor, Mr. Huang, began his attack immediately. His Mandarin was eloquent, persuasive painting. Ethan's company, as another American corporation, looking to exploit Chinese manufacturing without understanding or respecting Chinese business culture. He cited examples of failed partnerships, cultural insensitivity, the tendency of American companies to abandon Chinese partners when convenient. Mr. Miles cannot even speak our language, Huang said, his tone dripping condescension. How can he claim to want a lasting partnership when he hasn't made the effort to communicate with us in our own tongue? Lena translated everything for Ethan, but she could see him struggling. He had counter-arguments, but delivering them through translation would make him seem weak, disconnected. She made a decision. Mr. Miles, she said quietly in English, trust me. Then she stood addressing the council in Mandarin that was deliberately more formal, more classical than modern business Chinese. Honored council members, before we continue, may I share something my mother taught me? She said that judgment without investigation is the height of ignorance. The room's attention shifted to her, but some surprised, others skeptical. Mr. Huang speaks of American companies abandoning Chinese partners. Yet he doesn't mention that his own company terminated 3 American partnerships in the last 5 years when they became inconvenient. He speaks of cultural insensitivity, yet he addresses Mr. Miles in Mandarin, knowing he cannot respond, using language as a weapon rather than a bridge. Huang's face flushed. Who is this woman to? I am someone who learned Mandarin from scratch because I believed in the possibility of understanding between cultures. Lena interrupted, her voice carrying an authority she'd never known she possessed. I am someone who cleaned hotel rooms while studying international trade law because I believed that knowledge has no class boundaries. I am the bridge Mr. Miles built to reach you, not because he cannot learn your language. He's been studying Mandarin for 2 years, but because he respects it enough to want it represented perfectly in these crucial conversations. She turned to Ethan. Mr. Miles, would you like to address the council? Ethan stood, and in careful but clear Mandarin he said, My pronunciation is imperfect, and my vocabulary is limited. But I've learned enough to say this respect isn't just about language. It's about action. It's about choosing partners based on shared values, not just profit. It's about bringing someone like Ms. Carter onto my team because I recognized that her perspective, earned through struggle and self-determination, was more valuable than a dozen MBAs. He switched to English, with Lena translating seamlessly. My company isn't perfect. America isn't perfect. But our partnership with Zhang Industries isn't about American or Chinese. It's about creating something new, something that honors both traditions while building toward a shared future. Ms. Carter is proof that such bridges are possible. The room was silent. Then Madame Liu asked in Mandarin, Ms. Carter, why should we believe this partnership is different? Lena felt the weight of the moment, the way everything balanced on her next words. She thought of her mother, of Harold, of every invisible person who'd ever been told their dreams were too big for their circumstances. Because it's built on truth rather than pretense, she said. Mr. Miles didn't hire a polished translator from an expensive agency. He elevated someone who understands what it's like to be unseen, to be underestimated. That's the same respect he'll bring to this partnership. He doesn't see Chinese manufacturing as cheap labor to exploit. He sees it as expertise to honor relationships to nurture. She pulled out a document. I've prepared a cultural integration plan for the partnership. Monthly exchanges where American and Chinese workers shadow each other. Language learning programs for both sides. Profit sharing that ensures success is mutual. This isn't just about making money. It's about making connections that transcend borders. And you developed this plan? Madame Liu asked, in collaboration with both Mr. Miles and Mr. Zhang. Because that's what real partnership looks like, multiple voices creating harmony. The council deliberated for an hour. Lena translated the discussion for Ethan, watching as arguments flowed back and forth like tide. Huang made more accusations, but they felt hollow now, exposed as the competitive manipulation they were. Finally, Madame Liu announced the decision. The council finds no violation in the Miles-Zhang partnership. In fact, we commend it as a model for future international cooperation. Ms. Carter, your presentation has been educational. As the meeting concluded, Huang approached Lena. She expected anger, but his expression was thoughtful. You learned Mandarin from garage sale tapes. My mother's garage sale tapes, she corrected. And now you're reshaping international business deals. He shook his head. Perhaps I've been looking at partnership wrong. Perhaps the bridges we need aren't built in boardrooms, but in the spaces between worlds. That evening, Zhang hosted a celebration dinner at a restaurant overlooking the Bund. The private room was elegant but warm, filled with the key players from both companies. Lena found herself seated between Ethan and Zhang, no longer the translator, but a full partner in the conversation. You know what you did today, don't you? Zhang asked her, as they waited for the first course. You didn't just save the deal. You changed how that council thinks about international partnership. Madame Liu has already called me twice wanting to know more about your cultural integration plan. It was just an idea. No, Ethan interrupted. It was vision. The kind that comes from seeing both sides clearly. That's rare, Lena. Rare and valuable. The dinner progressed with multiple courses, each more elaborate than the last. Lena found herself relaxing, laughing at stories, contributing her own observations about the cultural differences she'd noticed. For the first time since arriving in Shanghai, she didn't feel like she was performing or proving herself. She just was. Then Zhang's assistant rushed in, whispering urgently in his ear. His expression darkened. What is it? Ethan asked. The Chicago Tribune. They've published an article. Zhang handed over his phone. The headline made Lena's blood run cold. From maid to mogul, questions emerge about Lena Carter's qualifications. The article was devastating. Someone, almost certainly Claudia, had fed the reporter a narrative that Lena was a fraud, that her Mandarin was barely functional, that she'd manipulated her way into a position she couldn't handle. They'd found former hotel guests who claimed she'd been rude, inefficient. They'd even interviewed someone claiming to be one of her online language tutors, saying she'd been a terrible student who couldn't grasp basic concepts. It's not true, Lena said, her voice barely a whisper. None of it's true. We know, Ethan said firmly. This is a hit piece, Claudia's revenge. But the damage was spreading. Zhang's phone rang constantly, board members, partners, all wanting to know if they'd been deceived. Social media was already picking up the story with hashtags like #MaidScam trending. I should go back, Lena said, standing abruptly. I'm jeopardizing everything you've built. Sit down, Zhang commanded, his tone brooking no argument. This is exactly what they want for you to retreat, to become invisible again. The question is, what are you going to do about it? What can I do? I can't prove a negative. I can't prove I'm not a fraud. No, Ethan said slowly, an idea forming in his eyes. But you can prove what you are. Zhang, how quickly can you arrange a press conference? Here tonight, I can have media here in an hour. But do it, Ethan said. Lena, you're going to give them something Claudia never expected: complete transparency. The next hour was a blur of preparation. Mei Lin coordinated media contacts, while Jennifer, connected via video from Chicago, prepared talking points. But when Lena stood before the assembled press, Chinese and international media crammed into the restaurant's main dining room, she ignored the prepared remarks. My name is Lena Carter, she began in Mandarin, then repeated it in English. 4 days ago, I was a housekeeper at the Skyline Suites Hotel in Chicago. That part of the story is true. What's not true is that I'm a fraud. She pulled out her phone, connecting it to the projection system Mei Lin had hastily arranged. These are my study logs. 3 years of daily practice documented. These are my online course certificates: international trade, business, Mandarin, Chinese history and culture. These are the books I read, the podcasts I listened to, the documentaries I watched. She switched between languages fluidly as she spoke, demonstrating not just fluency, but nuance, cultural understanding, the ability to adjust her tone and vocabulary for different contexts. But more importantly, she continued, this is why I learned. She showed a photo of her mother, the same one the Chicago News had used. Elizabeth Carter died believing that ordinary people could do extraordinary things if given the chance. I'm not special. I'm not a genius. I'm proof that dedication and discipline can transform anyone. A reporter raised his hand. The article claims you manipulated Mr. Miles and Mr. Zhang. I cleaned Mr. Miles's hotel room for 3 years without him knowing I existed. If I wanted to manipulate him, I would have revealed my skills much earlier. I came forward only when the alternative was watching a deal fail that would affect hundreds of jobs. What about the claims that your Mandarin is substandard? Instead of answering directly, she began reciting classical Chinese poetry, the same Tang Dynasty verses she'd discussed with director Chen. Then she switched to modern business terminology, explaining complex trade regulations with precision that made several reporters take notes. But the real test, she said, isn't what I can say. It's what I've done. Today I helped clear a shipment that was stuck in customs. I defended an international partnership before the Shanghai Manufacturing Council. I did this not because I'm special, but because I prepared. Because I believed my mother when she said that dreams don't have zip codes or job titles. An older Chinese journalist stood. Ms. Carter, what do you say to those who claim you don't belong in international business? Lena thought of Herald of Destiny, of every invisible person still cleaning buildings and believing their dreams were too big. I say that belonging isn't granted. It's taken. It's earned through work and courage and the willingness to be visible even when visibility makes you a target. I've been cleaning up after powerful people my whole adult life. Now I'm helping them build bridges. The only difference is that now you can see me do it. The room erupted with questions, but Zhang stepped forward. I'd like to add something. I've worked with many translators, many cultural consultants. Ms. Carter brings something unique, The perspective of someone who's lived on the margins and chosen to bridge them rather than simply cross them. That's not manipulation. That's innovation. Ethan joined them. Lena Carter saved my company's most important deal, not with an MBA or family connections, but with skills she built alone at night while working full-time. If that threatens some people, perhaps they should ask themselves why. The press conference continued for another hour, but the tide had turned. By the time it ended, #invisible. No more was trending again, but this time with support. Videos of Lena's multilingual presentation were going viral. The reporter who'd written the hit piece was being questioned about her sources. As the media dispersed, Lena found herself alone on the restaurant's balcony, looking out at Shanghai's glittering skyline. The city that had seemed so foreign this morning now felt like a place where she could belong, not because she'd conquered it, but because she'd been honest in it. "You did it," Maylin said, joining her. "You turned their weapon against them." "I told the truth," Lena corrected. "That's all." Sometimes that's the most revolutionary thing you can do. Her phone rang, Harold calling from Chicago, where news of the press conference was just breaking. "Saw you on CNN," he said without preamble. "You were magnificent. Your mama would be so proud." "I was terrified," Lena admitted. "Good. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's feeling the fear and speaking your truth anyway. You've got more courage in your little finger than most people have in their whole body." After they hung up, she remained on the balcony as Shanghai pulsed with life below. Tomorrow she'd visit the factories, continue the work of building bridges. Next week she'd fly to Beijing, then back to Chicago, to implement the Cultural Integration Program. Her life had become a constellation of cities, languages, challenges she couldn't have imagined a week ago. But tonight, she stood between worlds, no longer invisible, but not yet fully defined, no longer silent, but still finding her voice. The compass Zhang had given her sat heavy in her pocket, its needle pointing toward futures she was only beginning to imagine. A message from Marcus lit up her phone. "Just saw the press conference. You're trending worldwide. Also, 3 publishers want to buy your story. Jennifer's fielding calls. You're not just visible, Lena. You're luminous." She thought about her mother, about the woman who died with a box of unused language tapes and dreams of seeing the Great Wall. Tomorrow Zhang had arranged for her to visit it, not as a tourist, but as someone who'd earned her place in this ancient country through dedication and courage. "I did it, Mom," she whispered to the Shanghai night. "Not the way we planned, but I did it." The city answered with its symphony of progress, construction, and conversation, ambition, and achievement, millions of dreams rising like steam from street vendors' carts. Somewhere in Chicago, Harold was teaching his students that transformation was possible. Somewhere, Claudia was learning that revenge had consequences. Somewhere, a housekeeper was listening to language tapes on her break, believing that invisible didn't mean powerless. Zhang appeared beside her, silent for a moment, before speaking. "There's an old Chinese proverb, the gem cannot be polished without friction, nor humanity perfected without trials. You've had your friction, Ms. Carter. Now comes the polishing." "What if I'm not a gem? What if I'm just a regular stone that's good at pretending?" Zhang smiled. "Then you're the most valuable kind of stone, one that transforms itself through will rather than nature. That's not pretending. That's becoming." As the night deepened, Lena felt the truth of his words settling into her bones. She wasn't pretending to be something she wasn't. She was becoming something she'd always been capable of being, if only she'd had the courage to be seen. The transformation wasn't complete, might never be complete. But standing there between the country of her birth and the country of her mother's dreams, between who she'd been and who she was becoming. Lena Carter finally understood that the journey itself was the destination. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of her courage and capability. But tonight, she was exactly where she needed to be, visible, valuable, and vibrantly, defiantly alive. The Great Wall stretched before her in the morning mist, ancient stones disappearing into clouds that clung to the mountains like silk scarves. Lena stood at the Mutianyu section, less crowded than the tourist-heavy Bottling, her hand pressed against weathered brick that had stood for 600 years. Zhang had arranged for her to arrive before the gates officially opened, giving her this moment of solitude with history. She pulled out her phone and made a video call to Harold, who answered immediately, despite it being midnight in Chicago. "Show me," he said simply, and she turned the camera to capture the wall's serpentine path along the ridge. "My God," Harold breathed. "It's even more magnificent than the pictures." "I wish she could see it," Lena said, not needing to specify who she was. "She is seeing it, child, through your eyes with your heart. That's what love does, it transcends death through the living." After ending the call, Lena walked slowly along the wall, her footsteps echoing those of countless others across centuries. She thought about walls, the ones that protected the ones that divided the ones people built around themselves for safety. For 3 years, she'd lived behind walls of her own construction, invisible and safe. Now those walls were gone, and she felt both exposed and free. Her phone buzzed with a message from Ethan. "Board meeting in 3 hours. They want to hear about the cultural integration program directly from you. Car will pick you up in 90 minutes. The ride back to Beijing was quiet, giving her time to prepare. She'd presented to hostile councils and skeptical media, but this was different. This was the Miles Industries Board of Directors, old money, old power people, who'd known Ethan's father and weren't entirely convinced his son's international expansion was wise. The boardroom was exactly what she'd expected. Dark wood leather chairs, portraits of previous company presidents watching from the walls like judges. The 12 board members were already assembled, their faces ranging from curious to skeptical. At the head of the table sat someone she hadn't expected, Thomas Miles, Ethan's father, fresh from the hospital, but insisting on attending this crucial meeting. He was frailer than his portraits suggested, but his eyes were sharp, assessing. When he looked at Lena, she felt the weight of decades of business acumen studying her. "Ms. Carter," he said, his voice carrying, despite its softness. "My son tells me you're the reason we have a Chinese partnership." "Your son is being generous, Mr. Miles. I was simply a facilitator." He gestured to a chair. "Facilitate for us, then. Explain why we should invest millions in this cultural integration program when we could simply hire translators as needed." Lena remained standing, a choice that made several board members shift uncomfortably. "With respect, Mr. Miles hiring translators treats the symptom, not the disease. The disease is the assumption that business is just about numbers and contracts. It's not. It's about relationships, understanding respect that goes deeper than language." She moved to the presentation screen, pulling up statistics she'd gathered. 70% of international partnerships fail within 5 years. Do you know the primary reason? Cultural misunderstanding. Not language barriers, those can be overcome with translation. But the deeper failure to understand how different cultures approach trust, time hierarchy, and success. "That sounds like expensive philosophy," one board member interrupted, a woman with silver hair and cold eyes. "We need practical returns." "Then let me be practical," Lena replied, switching to the financial projections she'd prepared with Mei Lin. Companies with successful cultural integration programs see 40% better retention of international partnerships, 30% faster deal completion, and 50% higher profitability from international ventures. Why? Because when your Chinese partners know you've invested in understanding them, not just their language, but their values, they invest back. She pulled up her program outline. 6-week exchanges, where American workers shadow Chinese counterparts and vice versa. Monthly cultural workshops led by people who've lived in both worlds. Mentorship programs pairing senior staff across cultures. The total cost is less than what you'd lose from one failed partnership. And you'd oversee this, Thomas Miles asked, along with a team from both sides. But yes, I'd be the bridge. A bridge, he repeated thoughtfully. 40 years ago, I was laughed out of boardrooms for suggesting we needed computers. They said I was a mechanic who didn't understand real business. He looked at his son. Sometimes the best innovations come from people who see clearly because they're not blinded by tradition. The vote was closer than Lena would have liked, 7 in favor, 5 against, but it passed. As the board members filed out, Thomas Miles approached her. I looked you up, he said quietly. Read about your mother, your journey. Ethan's right. You're exactly what this company needs. Not because you speak Mandarin, but because you understand what it's like to transform. Companies need to transform too, and they need guides who've done it themselves. That afternoon, she found herself in Zhang's Beijing office, a space that managed to be both modern and classical, with traditional calligraphy scrolls hanging beside monitors displaying real-time market data. He was meeting with his senior staff, all of whom regarded Lena with curiosity. I want each of you to spend time with Ms. Carter over the next week, Zhang announced. Learn how she sees our business, our culture, our partnerships. She has perspectives we lack because we're too close to see clearly. One of his executives, a younger man named Chen, challenged this. What can someone who was cleaning hotels last week teach us about international business instead of being offended? Lena smiled. I can teach you what your competitors' executives say when they think no one important is listening. I can teach you that the American companies that fail in China are the ones that send their most arrogant negotiators, not their smartest. I can teach you that respect is shown in small gestures, how you pour tea when you exchange business cards, whether you remember someone's child is sick. She turned to Chen directly. Last night you had dinner with representatives from Samsung. You spent the entire meal checking your phone. They noticed. They told their colleague in Korean that Zhang Industries clearly didn't value their potential partnership. I heard them in the elevator this morning. Chen's face flushed. You speak Korean too? Enough to understand when someone's being dismissed. Languages are tools, Mr. Chen. But observation, that's the real skill. Zhang smiled approvingly. This is why Ms. Carter is valuable. She sees what we miss because we're too important to notice. The week that followed was intense. Lena shadowed different executives, attended strategy meetings, visited factories where she could see the literal nuts and bolts of the partnership being manufactured. But more importantly, she listened to workers on the factory floor who had ideas that never reached management, to middle managers frustrated by cultural miscommunication, to American expatriates struggling to adapt to Chinese business culture. In the evenings, she wrote reports not just about business, but about humanity. She wrote about the factory worker who'd developed a more efficient assembly process, but didn't share it because he feared being seen as criticizing his superiors. She wrote about the American manager who'd alienated his entire team by trying to implement casual Fridays, without understanding the importance of professional appearance in Chinese corporate culture. You're not just building a program, Ethan told her during one of their daily calls. You're building a philosophy. I'm building bridges, she corrected. The same ones my mother dreamed of crossing. On her last night in Beijing, Zhang hosted a farewell dinner. But when she arrived at the restaurant, she found it wasn't the intimate gathering she'd expected. The room was full executives from both companies, government officials, media representatives. A banner in both languages read, "Celebrating Partnership Through Understanding." "What is this?" she asked Zhang. "Your graduation," he replied. "From invisible to indispensable, from dreamer to bridge builder." The evening was a blur of speeches and toasts. But the moment that mattered most came when a young woman approached her speaking hesitant English. "Ms. Carter, I'm Liu Wei. I work in the Shanghai factory third shift. I heard your story on the news. I've been studying English at night, dreaming of working in international trade. Everyone says it's impossible, I'm just a factory worker. But you were just a cleaner and now..." She trailed off, eyes bright with hope. Lena took the woman's hands. "What's your English level?" "Intermediate, but improving." "Email me your resume. The cultural integration program will need coordinators who understand both worlds. Factory experience is valuable, you know how things really work, not just how they look on paper." Liu Wei's tears were answer enough. As the dinner wound down, Lena found herself on the restaurant's roof garden, Beijing sprawling endlessly in every direction. The city felt different from Shanghai, older, heavier with history, but also more formal, more conscious of its role as a capital. Ethan joined her, having flown in for the dinner. "You've changed," he observed. "In just a week, you've changed." "Have I feel the same?" "No, there's something different. You're not trying to prove yourself anymore. You just are." She considered this. Maybe that's what visibility really means. Not being seen by others, but finally seeing yourself clearly. "Zhang offered you a permanent position in Shanghai, didn't he?" Lena looked at him sharply. "How did you know?" "Because I would have done the same." "You're remarkable here, Lena. You fit in a way that shouldn't be possible but is." "And what does that mean for our arrangement?" "It means you have choices, real choices. Stay here, come back to Chicago, split your time. The world is literally open to you now." The weight of that truth settled on her shoulders. A week ago, her biggest decision was whether to reveal her language skills. Now she was choosing between continents, between futures she couldn't have imagined. "I need to go home first," she said finally. "Not to choose, but to complete something." The flight back to Chicago felt like traveling through time. She'd been gone only a week, but she felt years older, decades wiser. The city looked different from the plane, smaller, somehow more contained, but also more dear. This was where her mother had lived and died, where she'd been invisible, where she'd chosen to be seen. Harold met her at the airport, his presence steady and grounding. "Welcome home, world traveler. How was the Great Wall? Everything Mom dreamed and more." "And you, are you everything you dreamed?" She thought about it as they drove through familiar streets. "I'm everything I never dared to dream." The next morning, she stood in the Skyline Suites Hotel, but this time in the ballroom where everything had changed. The space was set up for a press conference, her official introduction as Director of Cultural Communications for the Miles Zhang Partnership. But first, she had requested a private moment. The hotel staff had gathered housekeepers, bellhops, maintenance workers, all the invisible people who kept the building running. Destiny was in the front row, Marcus beside her, both looking at Lena like she was some sort of miracle. "I wanted to talk to you first," Lena began, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "Because you're my people. You know what it's like to be invisible, to have dreams that seem too big for your circumstances. I'm here to tell you they're not." She pulled out a document. The Elizabeth Carter International Language Fund isn't just about languages. It's about education, transformation, the chance to become who you're meant to be. Starting next month, any hotel employee can apply for funding to pursue education, languages, trades, degrees, whatever will help you transform. The selection committee will include service workers because we understand the challenges. The murmur that went through the crowd was electric. Hope, Lena realized, was contagious. But more than that, she continued, I want you to know that what you do matters. The work you do in silence and shadow, it matters. You see things others miss, understand things others ignore. That's not worthlessness. That's wisdom. After the staff meeting, the media filed in. The questions were predictable, but Lena answered them with a confidence that would have been impossible a week ago. She spoke about the partnership, the cultural integration program, the fund. But she also spoke about transformation, about the courage to be visible, about bridges built one conversation at a time. Ms. Carter, one reporter asked, Claudia Winters has been charged with defamation for the false article. Do you have any comment? Lena had thought about this moment, about what she'd say when given the chance for public revenge. Ms. Winters acted from fear that if someone like me could succeed, it meant the walls she'd built around herself were meaningless. I hope she finds the courage to transform rather than tear down. The world has enough walls. We need more bridges. That evening, there was a celebration at Ethan's family estate, a sprawling property on Lake Michigan that looked like something from a movie. The gathering was small but significant. The board members who'd supported her Zhang and his key staff, who'd flown in for the announcement, Harold, Jennifer, even Destiny and Marcus. To Lena Carter. Ethan raised his glass as the sun set over the lake, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Who reminded us that greatness doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it whispers from the shadows until the world is ready to listen. But Lena wasn't listening to the toasts. She was watching Harold in deep conversation with Thomas Miles, both men laughing about something. She was watching Liu Wei, who'd flown in from Shanghai, practicing English with Jennifer. She was watching the walls between worlds becoming permeable. Zhang approached her as the party continued around them. You haven't given me your answer about Shanghai. I know. But you've decided. She nodded. I'll split my time. 2 months in Shanghai, 1 month in Chicago, rotating. But I want to expand the program. Not just Miles and Zhang Industries, I want to create a model other companies can follow. A new way of building international partnerships based on cultural understanding, not just profit. Ambitious. My mother was a dreamer. I'm a builder. I build her dreams into reality. Zhang smiled. Then we'll build together. East and west, visible and invisible dreams and reality. As the party wound down, Lena found herself walking along the lake shore with Harold. The water was calm, reflecting the first stars of evening. You know what I realized in China, she said. Mom's dream wasn't really about seeing the Great Wall. It was about being someone who could see the Great Wall, someone with agency, choices, the ability to cross oceans. She gave me that dream, but I had to transform it into something achievable. And now I help others transform their dreams. The fund, the program, all of it, it's about making transformation possible for people who think it isn't. Harold stopped walking, taking her hands in his weathered ones. Your mother would be so proud. But more than that, she'd be amazed at who you've become. You didn't just fulfill her dream child. You exceeded it. The next months passed in a blur of airports and meetings, factories and classrooms. The cultural integration program launched with remarkable success. The first exchange brought 10 Chinese workers to Chicago and 10 Americans to Shanghai. There were challenges, miscommunications, homesickness, resistance to change, but also breakthroughs. Lena watched a Chinese engineer teach an American colleague about Guanxi, the complex network of relationships that underpinned Chinese business. She watched an American manager learn to read the subtle signals that indicated disagreement in a culture where direct confrontation was avoided. She watched walls crumble and bridges rise. The Elizabeth Carter Fund received over 1,000 applications in its first month. Lena insisted on reading everyone, seeing herself in each story of deferred dreams and hidden potential. They funded 100 students in the first-round hotel, workers learning languages, janitors pursuing engineering degrees, security guards studying law. "You're changing lives," Jennifer told her during one of their coordination meetings. "No," Lena corrected. "I'm providing opportunities. They're changing their own lives." But the work was exhausting. Living between two worlds meant never fully resting in either. There were nights in Shanghai when she dreamed in Mandarin and woke confused. There were days in Chicago when she felt like a stranger in her own city. It was Ethan who noticed her burning out. "You're trying to be everything to everyone," he said during one of their monthly strategy sessions. "Even bridges need maintenance." "I can't slow down. There's too much to do, too many people depending on you being healthy and sustainable," he interrupted. "Lena, you've built something amazing, but if you burn out, it all falls apart." She knew he was right. That evening, she made a decision. She called Mei Lin and asked her to take over the Shanghai operations for a month. She asked Jennifer to manage the fund applications. Then she booked a ticket to a place she'd been avoiding home. Not Chicago, but the small town in Missouri where she'd grown up, where her mother had worked 3 jobs to keep them afloat, where dreams had seemed as distant as stars. The town looked smaller than memory, worn around the edges like an old photograph. The apartment building where they'd lived was still there, though the color had changed from green to beige. The elementary school where her mother had cleaned at night, while Lena did homework in empty classrooms, still standing, still needing paint. She visited the cemetery where her grandmother was buried, the one her mother could rarely afford to visit. She placed flowers on the grave and told her grandmother about her daughter's dream and her granddaughter's journey. 3 generations, she said to the weathered headstone. 3 generations to go from cleaning houses to building international bridges. But we all mattered. Every step mattered. On her last day in Missouri, she visited the library where her mother had borrowed language tapes before finding them at the garage sale. The librarian, Mrs. Henderson, was still there, older, but still bright-eyed. "Lena Carter," she exclaimed. "We've been following your story. Your mother would come in here, you know, reading travel books about China. She'd sit in that corner for hours, taking notes." "I didn't know that." Mrs. Henderson disappeared into the back room, returning with a worn notebook. "She left this once, years ago. I kept meaning to return it, but, well, life gets in the way. Maybe you should have it now." The notebook was filled with her mother's handwriting phrases in attempted Mandarin facts about Chinese culture, a bucket list of places to visit. But on the last page, something different. "My dream for Lena, that she lives boldly, loves freely, and never accepts that anything is impossible. That she sees the world not as it is, but as it could be. That she builds bridges I could only dream of crossing." Lena sat in her rental car crying for the first time since the journey began. Not tears of sadness, but of completion, of understanding that she hadn't stolen her mother's dream she'd inherited. It transformed it and made it bigger than either of them had imagined. When she returned to Chicago, she found the program had not only survived her absence but thrived. Mei Lin had implemented new efficiency measures in Shanghai. Jennifer had partnered with 3 other hotels to expand the fund. The integration program had requests from 6 other companies wanting to implement similar models. "You built something bigger than yourself," Harold told her when she expressed surprise. "That's the mark of real success, when it doesn't need you to survive." 6 months after that first moment of visibility in the hotel ballroom, Lena stood before the United Nations Global Business Council, presenting the cultural integration model to representatives from 50 countries. She spoke in English Mandarin and the fragments of Korean and Japanese she'd been learning. Business without cultural understanding is just transaction, she said, her voice carrying to the furthest corners of the assembly hall. But business with cultural integration is transformation of companies, communities, and individuals. We don't need to erase our differences. We need to build bridges across them. The applause was thunderous, but Lena barely heard it. She was thinking about her mother, about Harold, about every invisible person who'd ever been told their dreams were too big. She was thinking about Liu Wei, who was now managing the Shanghai Coordination Office. About Marcus, whose stories had been published in a literary magazine. About Destiny, who'd started her own cleaning company that guaranteed education support for all employees. After her UN presentation, she had dinner with Zhang and Ethan in New York, the three of them sitting in a restaurant overlooking Central Park. "You know what you've become, don't you?" Zhang asked. "Tired," she replied, only half joking. "Essential," Ethan corrected. "Not just to our companies, but to a new way of thinking about international business." "I've had an offer," Lena admitted. "The State Department wants me to develop cultural integration programs for their trade missions." Both men leaned forward, concerned about losing her. "I'm not taking it," she continued. "Not fully. But I am going to consult for them, help them build their own bridges. The model we've created needs to spread beyond just our partnership." "And us?" Zhang asked. "You'll always be my first bridge," she said. "The one that made all the others possible." That night, alone in her hotel room high above Manhattan, Lena video called Harold. "I saw your UN speech," he said immediately. "You were magnificent. A year ago you were invisible. Now you're speaking to the world. It doesn't feel real sometimes. The best transformations never do. They feel like dreams until suddenly they're just life." He paused. "I have news too. I'm going back to teaching full-time. A school in Bronzeville offered me a position heading their new global studies program." "Harold, that's wonderful." "It's terrifying," he corrected. "But you taught me that terrifying is just another word for growth." After they hung up, Lena stood at the window looking out at the city that never slept. Tomorrow she'd fly back to Shanghai for a major partnership announcement. Next month she'd be in London, then Tokyo, then Sao Paulo, spreading the gospel of cultural integration. But tonight, she pulled out the compass Zhang had given her, the one that had traveled with her to every meeting, every challenge, every triumph. The needle pointed steadily north, but she understood now that direction mattered less than movement, less than the courage to take the next step. Her phone buzzed with a message from a number she didn't recognize. When she opened it, she found a photo of a young woman standing in front of a university building holding an acceptance letter. The message read, "Ms. Carter, you don't know me, but I was cleaning rooms at the Marriott when I saw your story. I applied to college the next day. I start classes next week. Thank you for showing me that invisible doesn't mean powerless. Maria Santos." Lena saved the message, adding it to a folder that now contained hundreds of similar notes, people who'd found courage in her visibility, who'd chosen transformation over resignation. The morning of the anniversary arrived with unusual clarity, Chicago's skyline sharp against a crystalline October sky. Lena stood in her apartment, not the cramped studio where she'd hidden for 3 years, but a modest downtown loft she'd purchased 6 months ago, its windows facing east toward Lake Michigan, and beyond that toward China. 1 year. It had been exactly 1 year since she'd stepped out of invisibility in the Skyline Suites ballroom, her voice cracking the silence with 3 words that changed everything. "I speak Mandarin." Her phone buzzed with messages from around the world. Liu Wei from Shanghai sending photos of the newest batch of exchange workers. Marcus from Los Angeles, where he was covering a film festival for the Tribune. Destiny from her office, where her cleaning company had just landed a contract with 3 major hotels, all requiring cultural sensitivity training for their staff. The invisible had become visible, and visibility had become contagious. But the message that stopped her breathing came from an unexpected source. Claudia Winters. Ms. Carter, I know I have no right to contact you. I know what I did was unforgivable, but I wanted you to know that your response to my attacks, choosing grace over revenge, changed something in me. I've enrolled in night school studying social work. I want to help people instead of tearing them down. You probably won't believe this, but you saved me from myself. Thank you for showing me that transformation is possible even for someone who tried to destroy you. Lena read the message 3 times, feeling something shift in her chest. The woman who'd tried to end her career was herself transforming. The circle of change kept widening ripples from a stone she'd thrown into still water a year ago. Jennifer arrived at 9 arms full of preparations for the day's events. The anniversary celebration at the Skyline Suites would be more than just a party, it was the launch of something bigger. The documentary crew is already setting up, Jennifer reported, consulting her tablet. PBS wants to film your speech for their series on American transformation stories. The governor will be there along with representatives from 12 countries interested in implementing your model. And the surprise? Lena asked. Jennifer's smile was mysterious. That's Ethan's department. He just said to be ready by 2 o'clock. The ride to the hotel felt like traveling through time. The same streets she'd walked as an invisible woman now carried her as someone whose face had been on magazine covers, whose story was taught in business schools, whose name opened doors that had been sealed to people like her for generations. The Skyline Suites lobby was transformed with banners in multiple languages, celebrating transformation, honoring the invisible, building bridges, breaking barriers. But what stopped Lena in her tracks was the wall of photographs, hundreds of faces each with a small plaque telling their story. Hotel workers who'd received fund scholarships, exchange program participants, people who'd written to say her visibility had inspired their own transformation. We call it the Wall of Courage, Harold said, appearing beside her. He looked distinguished in his new role as Director of Global Studies, but his eyes held the same warmth that had first seen her potential. Every person up there chose visibility over invisibility, growth over safety. It's overwhelming, Lena admitted. It's just the beginning, Harold replied. Look closer. She did and gasped. There in the center was a photograph she'd never seen her mother. Elizabeth young and smiling, standing in front of a map of China at what looked like a library. How did you? Mrs. Henderson from your hometown library sent it. Your mother gave a presentation there once to kids about following dreams even when they seem impossible. She planted seeds, Lena. You're just the harvest. Before she could respond, Mei Lin appeared with Zhang Wei and his wife, whom Lena had never met. Mrs. Zhang was elegant in understated silk, her eyes sharp with intelligence. So you're the woman who transformed my husband from a skeptic about American partnership to a believer, she said in perfect English. He talks about you constantly, says you're proof that talent has no pedigree. Your husband gave me the chance to prove it, Lena replied. No, Zhang corrected. You took the chance. There's a difference. The morning dissolved into preparation and reunion. The Cultural Integration Program's first graduates had flown in from both countries, 40 people whose lives had been transformed by 6 weeks of immersion in another culture. They gathered around Lena like planets around a sun, sharing stories of breakthrough and challenge. I never understood why Americans were so direct until I lived there, one Chinese engineer explained. Now I see it's not rudeness, it's efficiency, transparency. I've brought that back to my team. And I learned that silence doesn't mean agreement, an American manager added. It might mean respect, contemplation, or polite disagreement. Reading that silence has made me a better leader. These were the victories that mattered. Lena thought not the magazine covers or awards, but the small moments of understanding that prevented conflicts, built trust, created possibilities. At noon, the ballroom doors opened for the main event. The space where she'd first revealed her voice was now packed with 500 people, business leaders, government officials, hotel workers, students, media from around the world. But Lena's eyes found the small group in the front row. The housekeeping staff from the Skyline Suites wearing their gray uniforms with unexpected pride. The program began with videos from around the world, testimonies from people inspired by Lena's story. A taxi driver in Mumbai who'd started learning Japanese, a secretary in London studying Arabic, a janitor in Sao Paulo who'd revealed his engineering degree and was now heading his company's innovation department. Then Ethan took the stage, commanding in a way that reminded everyone why he'd built an empire before 35. A year ago, he began. I thought I was hiring a translator. What I got was a revolution. Lena Carter didn't just save a business deal, she fundamentally changed how we think about talent, visibility, and value. Ladies and gentlemen, our Director of Cultural Communications and the founder of what's becoming a global movement, Lena Carter. The applause was thunderous, but Lena barely heard it. She was looking at the faces in the crowd, some familiar, some strange, all waiting for words that might change their own trajectories. 1 year ago, she began, her voice steady and clear. I stood in this room as a ghost made flesh. I'd been invisible for so long that visibility felt like nakedness. But I've learned something in these 12 months of living in the light. She paused, finding Harold's eyes, then Zhang's, then Ethan's. Visibility isn't about being seen. It's about seeing yourself clearly, without the distortions of fear or shame or other people's limitations. It's about recognizing that the walls between who we are and who we could be are thinner than paper if we just have the courage to push through. She pulled out her mother's notebook, the one Mrs. Henderson had given her. My mother wrote something in here that I want to share. The distance between dreams and reality is called action. But the bridge between fear and action is called courage. Build that bridge and anything is possible. She looked directly at the hotel workers in the front row. To those still invisible, still cleaning rooms and thinking your dreams are too big, they're not. Your perspective from the margins is valuable. Your ability to see what others miss is a superpower. Your dreams matter not because you're special, but because you're human. And humans are meant to grow, to reach, to transform. She shifted to Mandarin, addressing the Chinese delegation. To our partners across the ocean, we're not just building business relationships. We're proving that understanding transcends language, that respect transcends culture, that humanity transcends borders. Back to English, her voice rising with conviction. The Elizabeth Carter International Language Fund has supported 300 students in its first year. The Cultural Integration Program has been adopted by 20 companies across 6 countries. But numbers don't tell the real story. The real story is Liu Wei, who went from factory floor to management because someone saw her potential. It's Marcus, whose invisible observations became visible art. It's Harold, who remembered he was a teacher, not just a guard. She paused, emotion thickening her voice. It's my mother, who never saw China, but whose dream built a bridge that thousands have now crossed. The audience was silent, hanging on every word. But I'm not here just to celebrate what we've built. I'm here to announce what comes next. Jennifer and Ethan exchanged glances. This wasn't in the script. Today, we launch the Global Visibility Initiative. Not just for language learners or hotel workers, but for every person whose talents are hidden by circumstance, prejudice, or fear. We're partnering with companies worldwide to identify and elevate invisible talent. We're creating scholarship programs that go beyond education to include mentorship, networking, and placement. We're building bridges not just between countries, but between classes, between the seen and unseen, between who we are and who we can become. The applause started slowly, then built to thunder. But Lena wasn't finished. There's one more announcement. Something personal. The room quieted again. Next month, I'm taking a journey. Not for business, not for the program, but for my mother and myself. I'm walking the entire accessible length of the Great Wall. 40 days, 1,500 miles, carrying her ashes to scatter at the end. She never got to see it, but she'll rest there where dreams meet sky. The silence was profound, then broken by Jiang Wei standing, then Ethan, then Harold, then the entire room rising in ovation that seemed to shake the building's foundations. When the applause finally died, Ethan returned to the stage. "Now for that surprise," he said, and the ballroom doors opened again. A stream of people entered, dozens, then hundreds, all wearing t-shirts, with a simple message, "I was invisible." They were hotel workers from across the city, office cleaners, food service workers, security guards. But among them were also executives who'd hidden their backgrounds, professionals who'd been ashamed of their origins, people who'd made themselves small to fit in. "These are just the Chicago representatives," Ethan explained. "Right now in 12 cities around the world, similar gatherings are happening. All connected by live stream, all celebrating the same truth that visibility is a choice and courage is contagious." The screens around the ballroom lit up with feeds from Shanghai, London, Tokyo, Sao Paulo, Mumbai, Cairo, and more. Thousands of faces, all choosing visibility, all inspired by one woman's courage to speak. Lena felt her knees weaken. Jennifer steadied her, whispering, "You did this. You lit a match that became a wildfire." The celebration continued for hours. Lena found herself pulled in every direction, interviews, photographs, conversations with people whose lives had been touched by her story. But the moment that mattered most came near the end, when a young woman approached, hesitantly. She was wearing a housekeeping uniform from a different hotel, her hands trembling slightly as she held out a notebook. "Ms. Carter, I'm Sophia. I clean rooms at the Marriott. I've been studying French for 2 years, hiding it like you did. But today, watching you, I decided. Tomorrow, I'm telling my manager. Tomorrow, I become visible." Lena took the young woman's hands, feeling the circle complete, and begin again. "It will be terrifying," she said honestly. "But terror is just transformation wearing a disguise. Be terrified, then be brave, then be visible." As the event wound down, Lena found herself back on the hotel's roof, the secret sanctuary where she'd made so many decisions. But this time she wasn't alone. Harold, Ethan, Jiang, Jennifer, Mei Lin, all the people who'd become her chosen family over this transformative year. "To think," Harold mused, "a year ago you stood here afraid of being seen." "I'm still afraid," Lena admitted. "But now I know fear is just part of the journey." Jiang pulled out a small box. "For your walk next month," he said. Inside was a simple jade pendant carved with Chinese characters. "It says, 'Every step forward moves the world,'" he translated. "My grandmother gave it to me when I left for America. Now it's yours for your journey home." "China isn't my home," Lena protested. "Home isn't a place," Jiang replied. "It's where your truest self can exist." You've made the whole world your home by being visible in it. As the sun set over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of transformation, Lena thought about the year behind and the journey ahead. The Great Wall waited patient and eternal, ready to receive her mother's ashes and her daughter's gratitude. But that was next month's challenge. Tonight, she was exactly where she needed to be: visible, valuable, and vibrantly alive, surrounded by people who'd walked with her from shadow into light. Her phone buzzed with one final message of the day. It was from Maria Santos, the woman who'd sent her the university acceptance photo months ago. "Ms. Carter, I'm giving my first presentation tomorrow in Spanish and English about bridge building in immigrant communities. I'm terrified. But I remembered what you said: terror is just transformation wearing a disguise. Thank you for showing me that invisible doesn't mean powerless. It means potential waiting to unfold." Lena smiled, typing back, "You're going to be magnificent. Trust the voice you've been building in silence. It's stronger than you know." As the city lights began to twinkle below, Lena felt the weight and wonder of her transformation. She'd started as a whisper in empty rooms and become a voice that echoed across continents. But more than that, she'd become herself, not the self that hid in shadows, or the self that others expected, but the self her mother had dreamed of, the self Harold had seen, the self that had always existed, waiting for the courage to be visible. "You know what I realized?" she said to the group, all of them standing at the roof's edge, looking out at the city that had witnessed her metamorphosis. "Transformation isn't about becoming someone new. It's about revealing who you always were, just covered in fear and doubt and other people's limitations." "Then what's next?" Ethan asked. "After the wall, after the initiative launches globally, what's your next transformation?" Lena considered this feeling, the compass in her pocket, the one that had guided her through impossible changes. "I don't know," she said, and for the first time uncertainty felt like possibility rather than fear. But that's the beauty of being visible. You can't hide from your own potential anymore. You have to keep growing, keep reaching, keep building bridges to places you haven't imagined yet. A plane passed overhead, its lights blinking against the darkening sky, heading east toward China, toward tomorrow, toward futures that existed, because one person chose courage over comfort, visibility over invisibility, transformation over stagnation. "My mother had a saying," Lena said, her voice carrying across the rooftop and into the night. "She used to say, 'Dreams deferred don't die, they just wait for braver dreamers.' I think she was wrong about one thing, though. Dreams don't wait for braver dreamers. They create them." The group stood in comfortable silence, each processing their own transformations, their own journeys from invisible to essential. The city pulsed below them, millions of dreams rising like heat from the streets, and somewhere among them another invisible person was studying in secret, building bridges in silence, preparing for their own moment of visibility. The Elizabeth Carter International Language Fund had received its 10,000th application that morning. The Global Visibility Initiative had corporate sponsors lined up across 6 continents. The Cultural Integration Program had prevented 4 major international deals from collapsing due to miscommunication. The numbers were staggering, the impact undeniable. But Lena knew the real victory was smaller and larger than statistics. It was Sophia clutching her notebook, ready to reveal her French. It was Liu Wei training new coordinators in Shanghai. It was Marcus signing his first book deal. It was Harold teaching students that transformation was possible at any age. It was Claudia Winters choosing redemption over resentment. It was her mother, Elizabeth Carter, who'd planted seeds she'd never see bloom, whose garage sale dream had become a global movement, whose invisible daughter had become impossibly, brilliantly, irrevocably visible. As they finally left the rooftop, heading back to their transformed lives, Lena paused at the door for one last look at the city that had witnessed her metamorphosis. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the documentary interviews, the initiative launch, the preparation for her walk along the Great Wall. But tonight was for gratitude, for recognition of how far she'd traveled from that moment of frozen terror in the ballroom below. "Thank you," she whispered to the night, to her mother, to the universe that had conspired to make her visibility possible. "Thank you for the courage to be seen." The door closed behind her, but the transformation continued, rippling outward in waves that would touch shores she'd never see, inspiring voices she'd never hear, building bridges to futures that existed because one housekeeper decided that invisible was no longer enough. The next morning, as Lena prepared for the PBS interview, she found a package waiting at her door. Inside was a worn Chinese dictionary, the same edition her mother had bought at that long-ago garage sale. A note was attached: "Found this in an estate sale in Missouri." The woman said it belonged to Elizabeth Carter, that she'd lent it to her years ago to help with a community presentation about China. "Thought you should have it, Mrs. Henderson." Lena opened the dictionary, finding her mother's handwriting in the margins. Notes, pronunciation guides, dreams, disguised as vocabulary. On the inside cover, Elizabeth had written, "For Lena, when you're ready to see the world will be ready to see you." The prophecy had come true in ways Elizabeth could never have imagined. Her daughter hadn't just seen the world, she'd changed it, one bridge at a time, one voice at a time, one transformation at a time. The PBS crew arrived to find Lena holding the dictionary, tears streaming down her face, but smiling with a radiance that lit up the room. "Are you ready, Ms. Carter?" the director asked. Lena wiped her tears, straightened her shoulders, and stepped into the light of the cameras, not as the invisible housekeeper she'd been, or the international executive she'd become, but as herself, a bridge between worlds, a voice for the voiceless, a woman who'd chosen transformation and invited the world to join her. "I'm ready," she said, and her voice carried the weight of every invisible person who'd ever dared to dream of being seen. "Let's show them what's possible when we stop hiding our light." The cameras rolled, capturing not an ending, but a continuation, the story of Lena Carter, who'd reminded the world that transformation isn't a destination, but a journey, that visibility isn't a gift, but a choice, and that every person, no matter how invisible they seem, carries within them the power to change the world. As she spoke to the camera, articulating her vision for a world where talent was recognized regardless of its origin, where bridges replaced walls, where the invisible became essential, she thought of her mother one last time. "You were right, Mom," she said silently. "Dreams don't have zip codes or job titles. They just need someone brave enough to make them visible." The interview continued, but Lena's story, the story of transformation, of courage, of bridges built from dreams and determination, would ripple outward for generations, inspiring countless others to step from shadow into light, from silence into song, from invisible to illuminated. 1 year after she'd first spoken up in a hotel ballroom, Lena Carter stood as proof that transformation was possible, that visibility was powerful, and that sometimes the most extraordinary journeys begin with the simplest words, "I can help." The city sparkled beyond the windows, full of invisible people carrying invisible dreams, waiting for their moment of courage. And somewhere among them, another transformation was beginning. Another voice preparing to be heard, another bridge waiting to be built. The cycle continued, beautiful and eternal, a testament to the power of one person's courage to unlock the potential in thousands. Lena Carter had become visible. More importantly, she'd shown others that they could too. And that more than any business deal or award or recognition, Was her true legacy not that she'd transformed herself, but that she'd made transformation possible for everyone who came after?